The streets were filled with chaotic zombies as gunfire and exploding shells echoed through the area. From above, a man watched the scene with a pale and anxious expression. Below, terrifying zombie monsters wandered everywhere. Yet he calmly entered his room and added sugar to his coffee. Inside, a laptop displayed a video game, while terrified screams continued outside. The young man ignored the chaos, drinking coffee and playing comfortably. Through his headset, he joked with teammates, warning them that the girlfriend beside him might bite him. A blonde teammate laughed and dismissed the idea. At that moment, a girl sat quietly at his feet, trying to please him. But when she opened her mouth, it revealed a monstrous form, leaving him frozen in fear. While screams rose elsewhere, the protagonist remained focused on pushing the turret and finishing the match. After finally winning, he removed his headset and let out a relieved breath. Just then, someone shouted outside. He turned toward the door and saw a beautiful girl pleading for help, explaining that zombies and monsters filled the streets. He agreed to help her, but only if she accepted one condition. Blushing, she immediately agreed and tried to appear attractive in front of him. Without warning, a flash of motion appeared. The young man struck with a knife, cleanly cutting the girl in half. Her head rolled away as a system notification appeared, stating that eliminating a potential zombie granted 1 point. He then shut the door without hesitation. His name was Lin Fan. He had once been an ordinary interior designer until everything changed. During the outbreak, he tried to help a girl, only to discover she was a monster that bit his neck. As he approached death, a system appeared before him, identifying itself as an apocalypse survival system and establishing a zombie connection. He was then reborn at the moment he had originally died. When he checked the system, his physique and strength were both at level 10, while other attributes remained at 0. After killing his first zombie earlier, he discovered that each monster eliminated granted 1 point. Outside, a deformed zombie was feeding on the girl he had just killed. Lin Fan stepped out, and the monster immediately noticed him, stretching its tongue and opening its mouth to attack. Lin Fan simply swung his blade and cut off its head in one strike to test the system. The notification confirmed that another point had been added. Although many of the zombies were once his neighbors, Lin Fan had no choice but to eliminate them to survive. Over time, numerous zombies piled up in front of his door while the system's counter steadily increased. Later, he noticed that the corpse of a neighbor he had killed earlier, Vivi, had disappeared. He could only assume it had been completely eaten, leaving nothing behind. Looking at the growing pile of bodies outside his door, he began worrying about the mess. If left there too long, the smell would spread into his room. Lin Fan gathered a large rope and tied the corpses together before dragging them toward the garbage heap. As he moved the pile, a strange sound came from ahead. Looking up, he saw the silhouette of someone sitting in a wheelchair. The figure slowly came into view. It was a monster. Its back was covered with clusters of large eyes, while its mouth was filled with long red tongues and jagged teeth. The wheelchair-bound zombie suddenly stood up and lunged toward Lin Fan. Lin Fan recognized the attacker as Uncle Yang from the downstairs unit on the second floor. Without hesitation, he swung his blade and ended the attack with a single strike. Afterward, he paused and remarked that Uncle Yang had probably intended to leave in the wheelchair. Lin Fan then used it to load the zombie corpses, making them easier to transport, even mentioning that he would return it properly when he finished. Once the bodies were moved, the wheelchair was placed neatly in front of room 203. Lin Fan stood by the large dumpster, looking at the pile of corpses and quietly reflecting on the reality of the apocalypse. What troubled him most was the growing number of bodies and a lack of any practical way to dispose of them. There was also no normal person nearby with whom he could discuss what to do. While thinking about this, he suddenly heard movement behind him. Looking up, he saw someone on the upper floor waving down. Lin Fan immediately recognized him as Uncle Zou's son, a known addict who had bullied him before and once stolen his bicycle. Although the bicycle had been returned after Lin Fan reported the theft to the police, the man had beaten him badly the following day. Lin Fan looked up at him with a tired expression and asked what he wanted. The man seemed surprised that Lin Fan spoke calmly and showed no fear of the surrounding zombies. He then took out a notebook and wrote a clear order, telling Lin Fan to quickly gather food and drinks and deliver them to his door. His expression made it clear he expected obedience. Lin Fan refused directly. The man became furious and wrote again, saying that if Lin Fan followed his orders, he would allow him to stay with him and eventually take him to a secret base when the opportunity came. Even with this offer, Lin Fan refused once more. Anger quickly took over. Uncle Zou's son crumpled the page, cursed Lin Fan, and glared at him with open hostility. He suddenly began throwing bowls and plates from above, shouting that Lin Fan would soon regret defying him. None of the objects struck Lin Fan, but the loud noise drew a group of zombies toward the alley. It soon became clear that attracting them had been his intention. The man laughed and continued taunting Lin Fan, expecting the zombies to finish him. Instead, Lin Fan calmly cut them down one after another. With each strike, heads fell and the system notifications continued announcing new points. Watching this, Uncle Zoe's son grew nervous. Still trying to maintain his arrogance, he pointed at a large mutated zombie nearby and shouted that Lin Fan would not survive this one, accusing him of daring to disobey orders. Lin Fan responded by grabbing the zombie and carrying it toward the building. He then threw it onto the man's balcony and announced that the zombie was a gift. The creature immediately lunged toward him. Panic replaced his earlier confidence as he shouted in shock, asking what Lin Fan was doing. Moments later, the balcony fell silent except for the struggle between the man and the zombie. Soon after, screams echoed through the alley. Lin Fan had already turned away, telling the man to discuss his complaints with the zombie because he had other things to do. Later, at a nearby supermarket, the system continued announcing points each time a zombie was eliminated. Inside the store, Lin Fan moved through the aisles while the notifications steadily increased. At the checkout, he casually placed a bag of food in front of the zombie shop owner, as if he intended to pay. Outside the supermarket, Lin Fan examined the knife in his hand and began considering a more efficient way to collect points. He thought about finding a suitable location where he could hunt zombies regularly and gradually become self-sufficient. For that, he would eventually need a stronger weapon than the blade he currently carried. As he was thinking, something nearby caught his attention. A bus was approaching. A bus sped into the area near Lin Fan's home, racing forward while a large group of zombies chased behind it. The vehicle rushed toward him, its headlights shining directly into his eyes. The glare triggered painful memories from his childhood. He remembered his stepmother angrily scolding his father and threatening to throw him out of the house. His father had tried desperately to find someone willing to take Lin Fan in. Hearing those words had deeply hurt him. When he cried, his aunt harshly rebuked him, saying she could not stand the sight of him and asking why he did not simply disappear. During the argument, she demanded that his father pull the car over to talk. In that moment of distraction, a bus from the opposite direction suddenly appeared. Lin Fan remembered staring forward with tears in his eyes as their car collided violently with the bus. The memory faded as the present returned. The bus now in front of him stopped nearby. A young man inside called out, asking if he wanted to get on. Lin Fan did not respond. The driver laughed and mocked him, saying that if he stayed there the zombies would tear him apart. Another passenger, a gentle-looking young man, questioned the driver and suggested they should help him. Before he could finish speaking, the driver turned, grabbed a sharp object, and stabbed him in the neck. He then shoved the wounded passenger out of the vehicle and warned that anyone who tried to act kind would share the same fate. The driver immediately accelerated, and the bus sped away. The bespectacled young man who had been thrown out barely survived. Looking back, he could still see Lin Fan standing motionless on the road. The driver, glancing through the rearview mirror, wondered whether Lin Fan truly intended to remain there alone in front of the pursuing zombies and dismissed him as a madman. Lin Fan remained still for a long moment, murmuring to himself that he would not die. Memories of his childhood with his gentle birth mother surfaced. She had always told him to grow up to be an honest and good person. Leaning forward, he prepared to throw his knife. Reminding himself of that promise, he hurled it with all his strength. The blade flew through the air and embedded itself in the bus's tire. The vehicle lost control at high speed and crashed. The driver became trapped beneath the overturned bus, his upper body pinned as he cried out in pain. Lin Fan soon arrived on his bicycle. The injured man begged him for help and admitted his wrongdoing. Sitting calmly on the bicycle, Lin Fan replied that the man was not admitting guilt but simply fearing death. With a faint smile, Lin Fan said that the man would soon meet his friend and that they would likely never see each other again. After that, he rode away, leaving the desperate driver behind. Moments later, a disfigured zombie lunged toward the trapped man, and a horde quickly gathered, tearing into him. Lin Fan continued cycling along the empty street. As he rode, the system notified him that his power had increased to 35 and his speed had reached 10. While passing a nearby building, a woman from an upper floor leaned out and called down for him to wait. At the window stood a woman and a small girl. They watched Lin Fan with confusion, wondering how he could calmly pass through an intersection filled with zombies. Lin Fan looked up and asked what they needed, noticing that the child appeared weak from hunger. Soon after, he followed them to their apartment. Inside, the mother knelt and pleaded for food, explaining that they had not eaten for several days and that the child was becoming very weak. Lin Fan handed her food, but casually remarked that he would be selling them 2 pumpkins and a winter melon. The woman was surprised that he still mentioned payment during the apocalypse, yet she said nothing. While standing there, Lin Fan noticed a sword displayed in the room and asked the woman to wait a moment. Seeing his interest, she took the sword down and explained that it belonged to her husband, who had been a gaming enthusiast and had bought it as a collectible. She offered to give it to him if he liked it. Lin Fan clearly appreciated it, but hesitated, asking how he could accept such a thing. The woman replied that they had no use for it anymore and told him to take it. Lin Fan accepted the sword with visible satisfaction. Before leaving, he said goodbye to the mother and child and told them to contact him if they needed help. As he walked away, he examined the sword with quiet excitement. He had wanted one for a long time, but had never been able to afford it. While he was still thinking about it, a body suddenly fell from above and crashed onto the street in front of him. The woman's body was covered with bruises and blood, and she coughed up blood as she hit the ground before going still. Looking up, Lin Fan saw a large, heavy-set man standing on an upper floor. The man appeared irritated and smoked a cigarette while looking down with regret, complaining that in times like this, it would be difficult to find another attractive woman to replace the one he had just thrown down. Observing the condition of the woman's body, Lin Fan realized she had likely been abused for a long time. The final expression in her eyes held both helplessness and anger. The sight reminded him of his own mother, who had once looked at his father with the same expression before her death. Lin Fan looked up and calmly asked the man why he had done it. The man seemed startled that someone was standing openly on the street and shouted back, asking who Lin Fan was. He declared that the area belonged to him and that the women in the building were his to use however he wished. Lin Fan ignored the threat. Sitting beside the woman's body, he quietly considered the situation. If he did nothing, the mother and child he had just helped might also be in danger. He then carried the woman's body upstairs toward the building. From above, the man continued shouting insults, mocking him for bringing a corpse upstairs and making crude remarks. He warned Lin Fan to leave immediately or face the consequences. The man returned to his apartment, opened a can of alcohol, and began drinking while muttering irritably. In his mind, the apocalypse meant there were no rules left, and he planned to wander through the building later to find more women to satisfy himself. While he was drinking in the room, someone suddenly knocked on the door. Startled, he turned to look. The man approached the door and asked who was there. He hesitated to open it, suspecting a zombie might be outside and feeling irritated that such trouble could interfere with his plans. When he finally looked through the peephole, he saw the face of the woman he had just thrown out. Startled, he fell backward in shock. Outside, Lin Fan had carried the woman's body to the door. He knocked and calmly told the man to open up, knowing he was inside. Recognizing Lin Fan's voice, the man relaxed slightly and shouted for him to leave, warning that staying there would only attract zombies. In reality, he was intentionally yelling loudly, hoping the noise would draw zombies to kill Lin Fan without him needing to act. Before that could happen, Lin Fan kicked the door with enough force to knock it off its hinges. The door slammed into the man, leaving him stunned. As Lin Fan stepped inside, the man stared in disbelief at his strength. Lin Fan quickly noticed numerous disturbing devices scattered throughout the apartment, realizing they were likely used to torture the woman. He placed the woman's body near the entrance while the man continued shouting in panic, demanding to know why a corpse had been brought into his home. Lin Fan turned back toward him, clearly furious, and said the man would soon face the consequences of his actions. Later, at the police station, the man had been completely restrained. Lin Fan had tied his hands and feet, gagged him, and secured a rope around him before dragging him along the road. As he pulled him forward, Lin Fan explained that he was taking him to the police station. The man struggled and cursed the entire time. He mocked Lin Fan, asking whether he had ever watched zombie movies or read zombie novels. Lin Fan briefly asked if he had. The man then shouted that in an apocalypse people should be free to do whatever they wanted. Hearing this, Lin Fan struck him and replied that fiction was not reality and should not be treated the same. Still unwilling to accept the situation, the man complained that even during the apocalypse, he was being dragged to a police station. When they arrived, the building was empty, but Lin Fan still threw him inside. The man looked back uneasily, unable to understand how Lin Fan possessed such strength. Earlier he had broken through the reinforced door, and now he had dragged him there, as if arresting a criminal. Furious, the man shouted that there was no point in bringing him there, because no one remained to enforce the law. Lin Fan responded with a faint smile and said he was mistaken. There were still people there. At that moment, the man sensed movement behind him. From the darkness, numerous red eyes appeared. Zombie police officers emerged and rushed toward him. As they attacked, Lin Fan calmly remarked that even though the police had turned into zombies, they were still present to punish criminals. The following day at Hongxi Library, a group of survivors organized supplies while preparing to deal with zombies. A middle-aged man sitting in a vehicle reassured everyone and told them to be careful. He then assigned tasks to 3 younger members of the group, 2 men and a woman. The woman reminded the 2 men accompanying her to stay focused on their mission, finding medical books without getting distracted. The 3 quickly approached the main entrance of the library. After checking the surroundings, an observer confirmed that no zombies were visible inside. Just as they were about to enter, the woman stopped them. She struck the door hard with the sickle in her hand to test the area. One of the men commented that it seemed safe, while the other remarked that she might be being overly cautious. The woman then pushed the door open and instructed the 2 men to locate the section containing medical books. At that moment, Lin Fan appeared nearby, casually waving at them. One of the men was so startled that he nearly panicked, thinking a zombie had spoken. Seeing their reaction, Lin Fan quickly explained that he was not a zombie. The woman cautiously asked why he was there. Holding a book, an encyclopedia about vegetable cultivation, Lin Fan simply replied that he had come to read, which was the normal purpose of a library. One of the men quietly remarked to the leader that the explanation made sense and that her earlier question had been unnecessary. She immediately told him to be quiet. She then politely told Lin Fan that they meant no harm and apologized if they had disturbed him. Lin Fan waved it off, saying it was not a problem. However, one of the men noticed the sword on Lin Fan's back and commented that it looked strange to carry such a weapon during the apocalypse. The other man quietly suggested it might be some kind of trap. The leader stepped forward and instructed her teammates to stay quiet and avoid causing any conflict. Their priority was finding the medical books. Still, when she glanced at Lin Fan, she felt uneasy. Something about him suggested he was not someone to provoke. She decided it would be safer to find the book quickly and leave. After locating the books they needed, the leader signaled for the group to depart. As they prepared to leave, Lin Fan called out for them to wait. The 2 men immediately became alert, preparing for a possible confrontation, while the leader calmly asked what he wanted. Lin Fan paused briefly before saying that they had taken too many books and should register them. If the books were not borrowed individually, they still needed to be recorded. His comment left the 3 of them standing silently in confusion. The 2 men whispered to each other, wondering if he had lost his mind since registration hardly mattered during the apocalypse. The leader then asked if he understood what was happening outside. Lin Fan casually replied that he knew the world was experiencing an apocalypse and that zombies were attacking people, but aside from that he did not see it as a major issue. His response only confused them further. The leader hesitated, uncertain whether he was serious. One of the men bluntly asked whether Lin Fan truly understood the situation or if fear had made him irrational. Lin Fan simply told them to think whatever they wished and that everyone could mind their own business. He then politely introduced himself, explaining that he lived in Building 2, Apartment 704 of the Yangwan complex. He mentioned that he was quite strong and that if they ever encountered trouble they could come find him. He even claimed he could eliminate a large number of zombies on his own. Hearing this, the 3 of them once again stood there in stunned silence. The 3 survivors stood speechless for a moment. Lin Fan's calm attitude unsettled them, and they quickly turned and ran, calling back that they would come find him if they needed help. Their leader, still shaken, felt certain that something about him was far from normal. Lin Fan watched them leave with mild disappointment and called after them, asking why they were running so quickly when he had not even learned their names. He soon returned to the book he had found and quietly continued reading the farming manual. Reminding himself to focus on his current plan, he decided to make good use of his time. Elsewhere, deep beneath a desert, an underground research base was studying zombie specimens. Researchers were collecting samples from captured zombie creatures. 2 scientists discussed their work, explaining that they were attempting to extract materials that might lead to antibodies capable of countering the zombie virus. However, the older scientist believed such a discovery was impossible, explaining that none had ever been found before. He then asked his colleague whether he had heard of certain genetic theories connected to the origin of zombies. The other man replied that some believed zombies were essentially the dead returning in another form of existence. After finishing his research at the library, Lin Fan arrived at an open area near his apartment complex. He felt the ground there would be suitable for planting crops. Standing there, he imagined how the place might look in the future. To check whether anyone else was nearby, he shouted loudly, introducing himself and announcing that he lived alone in apartment 704. The shouting quickly attracted a group of zombies. Wanting to secure the area before starting his plan, Lin Fan decided to eliminate them first. More zombies continued to appear, and he drew his sword and prepared himself. System notifications repeatedly appeared as he cut through the approaching zombies, each defeat adding points. After clearing the surrounding area, Lin Fan looked around and felt satisfied that the location was now safe for planting crops without interference. He continued shouting for a while longer to make sure no ordinary people were nearby, partly to avoid disturbing anyone and partly to ensure that any vegetables he planted would not be taken. Soon afterward, his stomach began to growl. He decided to find something to eat and thought of visiting the mother and daughter he had helped the previous day. Not long after, he arrived at their apartment. Using the groceries Lin Fan had brought earlier, the woman prepared a meal for him. As they ate, she gradually felt more comfortable around him. With her husband gone and only her daughter left, she hesitantly suggested that she hoped they might rely on him for protection in the future. Lin Fan, however, did not fully understand what she meant. While eating, he simply asked whether she needed any help. The woman was surprised by his straightforward response. Gathering her courage, she closed her eyes and explained that she and her daughter hoped to go with him. Lin Fan interpreted her words differently and enthusiastically suggested that they could move to the apartment complex where he lived. He even mentioned that the rent there was inexpensive and offered to help them contact a broker to arrange a place. Hearing this, the woman became completely confused, realizing that they were not discussing the same thing at all. Soon after, near Lin Fan's apartment complex, a group of real estate agents were gathered together. One man in a white shirt received a phone call and answered it. The caller was Lin Fan, asking about a property previously sold through the agency and wondering whether it could be rented. The agent, Mr. Chun, immediately became furious upon hearing the request. He ended the call abruptly and angrily cursed under his breath. Old Chun angrily complained about the call, unable to understand why anyone would ask about renting a house during the apocalypse. Leaning against the wall, he stared blankly at the sky. The disaster had arrived too suddenly. Their survival so far was only because the building they occupied was a high-end complex that zombies could not easily break into. For several days, everyone had been staying on the rooftop, waiting for rescue that never came. Soon his phone rang again. Annoyed, he answered and immediately cursed the caller. Lin Fan calmly replied that he simply wanted to rent the house. Old Chin hung up without another word. Lin Fan looked at his phone and sighed, commenting that people were acting strangely. He decided to try calling again. After several more calls, Old Chin finally answered while angrily shouting through the phone. Lin Fan once again stated that he only wanted to rent the property. Frustrated, Old Chin told him that if he truly wanted the place, he should come to the rooftop of Building 3 immediately and ended the call. Lin Fan returned to the mother and daughter and told them the owner had agreed to discuss the rental, asking them to wait. He left to negotiate and quickly shut the door behind him. The woman was stunned and tried to stop him, surprised that he would take the situation so seriously. Back on the rooftop of Building 3, Old Chin was still irritated after the call. Someone asked what had happened, and he explained that an unreasonable person had been harassing him. A man in a black suit placed an arm around Chun and quietly led him aside, saying he needed to discuss something important. Speaking in a low voice, the man explained that their food supplies would only last the two of them for about a month. He pointed out that there were 15 people on the rooftop, including 4 elderly individuals, and suggested that eliminating some of them would reduce the number of mouths to feed. Old Chun hesitated, noting that the food they had been eating had actually been gathered by an elderly couple. The man responded with a sinister smile, suggesting that once the older men were gone, the remaining men could also be dealt with, leaving the women under their control. His attention shifted toward several young girls sitting nearby, looking weak from hunger. Old Chin gradually accepted the idea, reasoning that keeping the younger women could serve as entertainment while they waited to see how the apocalypse unfolded. Meanwhile, Lin Fan was cycling toward the location Old Chun had given him. Zombies chased him along the streets, but he remained calm and even mocked their slow pace. His strength had reached level 40, his stamina 15, and his speed 15, making him far stronger than before. As he rode through the streets, survivors watching from tall buildings were shocked to see someone moving openly outside during such dangerous times. Some shouted warnings, telling him not to risk his life. Lin Fan ignored them and continued riding, finding the bicycle the most convenient way to travel. Before long, he reached the international district mentioned by Old Chun. The area was more spacious and developed than the neighborhood where Lin Fan lived. When he glanced back, he noticed that the group of zombies that had been chasing him had finally disappeared from sight, unable to keep up with his speed. Meanwhile, on the rooftop, Old Chun and his associate were preparing to carry out their plan against the elderly residents. They began influencing the younger survivors, quietly directing their suspicion and hostility toward the 4 elderly people who were staying there. Those elderly individuals included Wang Zhonggo, a discharged soldier, and Segufen, a former military medic. The food supplies everyone had been surviving on during the past few days actually belonged to them. When they saw the younger group gathering, they immediately understood what was about to happen. Quietly discussing it among themselves, they accepted the possibility that they might have to sacrifice themselves if the younger generation turned against them. Nearby, Mrs. Zhou, a retired military industry specialist, spoke calmly, remarking on Wang's willingness to accept the situation. The elderly did not show resentment toward the younger people. Instead, they accepted their possible fate, believing the younger generation might still have a chance to rebuild the world. Another elderly woman, Mrs. Lang Yin, a retired teacher, leaned toward her frail husband and quietly told him that after everything they had endured in life, enduring a little more hardship no longer mattered. Her husband, weak but composed, apologized for the suffering she had experienced because of him. She accepted it with quiet understanding. At the same time, Old Chun praised his partner for the plan they had devised. His associate responded by complimenting Chen's leadership. However, behind his respectful tone, the man was secretly planning something else. After the elderly were gone, he intended to eliminate the younger survivors as well and eventually deal with Old Chun himself so that he would be the only one left. Before the younger group could approach the elderly, Wang Zhonggo stepped forward. He calmly stated that he understood what the younger people intended to do. He explained that they did not need to push the elderly off the rooftop, as that might leave psychological scars later. Instead, the elderly would return to their rooms and quietly accept their fate. The supplies they had gathered could be freely used by the others. Just as the situation seemed settled, a young woman objected. She argued that allowing the elderly to go downstairs would be dangerous. If they opened a door and allowed zombies into the building, everyone on the rooftop might be killed. Hearing this reasoning, the others quickly agreed. At that moment, loud knocking echoed from the rooftop door. A voice called out, asking if Mr. Chun was there. The group turned toward the door and heard someone announcing that he had come to discuss renting a house. Old Chun immediately became suspicious and demanded to know who it was. Before anyone could respond, the door suddenly burst open after a powerful kick. Lin Fan stepped through the broken doorway and quickly apologized, explaining that he had not realized the door was so loose. Old Chen's associate quietly pulled him aside and whispered a suggestion. They could agree to rent the house, then later push Lin Fan off the rooftop along with the elderly. If zombies appeared, Lin Fan would panic and run, drawing the zombies away while they remained safe. Old Chen nodded in approval, clearly pleased with the idea. Lin Fan stepped forward and politely asked who Mr. Chun was. Chun raised his hand and casually agreed to rent the property to him. Lin Fan then pulled out a bundle of cash and handed it over, explaining that he only had 5,000 yen available at the moment as a deposit and would transfer the rest later. Hearing this, Old Chun felt a headache coming on. The situation seemed absurd, but he decided to proceed with the plan for now. He told Lin Fan that he could stay as long as he wanted. Lin Fan happily thanked them and prepared to leave. As he turned away, he suddenly paused and looked at one of the elderly men. He politely asked if he was Wang Zhonggo. The old man confirmed it. Lin Fan's expression immediately brightened. Clearly excited, he hurried over and explained that he recognized him from television. He spoke about how Wang Zhonggo had once traveled abroad to secure important weapons technology and had personally led teams through difficult technical challenges, bringing great honor to the country. The old man responded modestly, saying those achievements belonged to the past. Lin Fan then looked at the other elderly people with concern and asked whether they truly intended to leave the rooftop. He pointed out that the outside world was extremely dangerous. Wang calmly explained that they planned to leave so the younger people could keep the food supplies. They believed they were already old and might not survive much longer anyway. Hearing this explanation, Lin Fan quickly understood the selfish intentions of the younger group. His expression darkened with anger. Seeing that look alone made Old Chun uneasy, and both he and Xiao Xiao began to feel nervous. Lin Fan then turned back to the elderly and cheerfully invited them to come with him. He explained that his apartment area was relatively safe and that they could stay there for the time being. The elders worried about causing trouble and politely declined, but Lin Fan continued encouraging them in an upbeat manner. He suggested they move to his apartment complex and said he would speak with the landlord to arrange housing for everyone. He insisted that although he might not look impressive, he was capable of helping them. The elderly people slowly began to believe him, though they were still surprised by his unusual enthusiasm. Lin Fan eventually began guiding them toward the exit, urging them not to hesitate and to follow him. Seeing this, Old Chen shouted for them to wait. However, Xiao Xiao stopped him and suggested letting them go for now. When Chen looked at him in confusion, Xiao Xiao reminded him of their earlier plan. With a malicious smile, he explained that once the group went downstairs, he would attract zombies toward them. When the zombies arrived, they could eliminate both the elderly and Lin Fan at once. After Lin Fan led the elderly out of the building, objects suddenly began falling from above, creating loud noise around them. Looking up, they saw members of the rooftop group throwing items down. Under Chun and Xiao Zhao's instructions, the younger people were deliberately causing chaos below. The elderly grew angry at the reckless behavior. As objects continued to fall, Lin Fan glanced upward and quietly remarked that the situation was worse than it seemed. At that moment, Wang Zhongguo realized what the younger group intended. By creating loud noise, they were trying to attract zombies to the area and wipe them out. Mrs. Lang Yan's elderly husband suddenly trembled, saying something felt wrong. When they looked around, they were shocked to see that the surrounding streets were completely clear of zombies. Every zombie in the area had already been killed. The sight made them wonder whether someone had set up a massive killing trap nearby. Gradually, the elders began to understand what had happened. Their attention slowly shifted toward Lin Fan. Feeling their gaze, Lin Fan scratched his head awkwardly and tried to brush it off with a casual explanation. He said that he had no choice but to deal with the zombies earlier, otherwise he would not have been able to reach the rooftop. His calm remark left the elderly stunned. At that moment, they felt more uneasy about Lin Fan than about the zombies themselves. What troubled them was not that he had killed the zombies, but how he had managed to eliminate so many on his own. Although the young people on the rooftop kept throwing objects down, nothing happened below. The street remained quiet. Confused, Old Chen stepped forward and said he would check for himself. When he looked down, his expression suddenly twisted with fear. Beside him, Xiao Xiao abruptly pushed a young man off the rooftop. The body fell to the ground below. Even Old Chen was shocked by the act. Xiao Xiao coldly explained that if noise failed to attract zombies, the smell of fresh blood would. The others quickly agreed with him. Old Chen even praised the idea, saying Xiao Xiao was the only one thinking clearly. Below, the body landed behind Lin Fan with a heavy thud. The loud impact and the smell of blood soon attracted nearby zombies. One after another, the starving creatures began gathering around the area. Watching from above, the young people grew excited. They believed their plan had succeeded as zombies surrounded Lin Fan and the elderly group. The elders became nervous, sweat appearing on their faces. Lin Fan, however, remained calm. He asked Wang Zhongguo whether he owned a car. The old man replied that he did, but it was parked in the garage. Lin Fan immediately brightened at the news. A car would make things easier since his bicycle could not carry everyone. He quickly instructed the elderly to bring the vehicle to a specific location and said he would handle a few things first. As Lin Fan rushed away, the elderly felt uneasy and suggested that he escape while they distracted the zombies. One of the older women stopped them, believing Lin Fan must already have a plan. She insisted they follow his instructions instead. Not long afterward, Lin Fan reached the building's main entrance, where the zombies had gathered outside. From above, Old Chen noticed that the zombies had not yet entered the building and that Lin Fan had come to the door. Xiao Xiao dismissed Lin Fan as irrational, but Old Chen became convinced he had lost his mind. Laughing, he claimed the man had gone insane and was about to open the door himself to let the zombies in. But when Old Chen looked again, Lin Fan was nowhere in sight. Xiao Xiao assumed he had run away. Suddenly, both men froze in shock. From their position above, they realized Lin Fan was actually leading the zombies into the building. Within moments, Lin Fan had guided the swarm through the main entrance and quickly reached the rooftop door. The young people rushed toward him in anger, demanding to know what he was doing. Lin Fan casually waved and said they had been trying to lure zombies there, so he had simply helped them. After saying that, he stepped aside. The zombies surged through the doorway, pushing over each other as they chased the scent of human flesh. With nowhere left to escape, Old Chun and the young man who had planned to sacrifice the elderly were now trapped. One of them shouted angrily at Lin Fan as the swarm closed in. Later, the scene shifted to an old pale pink apartment building. Inside, a woman called for everyone to wash their hands because the meal was ready. She was Faye's mother. She invited Lin Fan to try the food and sincerely thanked him, explaining that they could now live peacefully because of his help. The other elders agreed, saying they would not have survived without him. While they spoke, Lin Fan continued looking quietly at Faye. Noticing his gaze, she asked innocently why he was staring and wondered if something was wrong with her face. Lin Fan noticed Faye's backpack and asked about it. The girl looked confused, not understanding what he meant. He patiently explained that even during the apocalypse, children still needed education. He mentioned a retired teacher living nearby could teach her and said he would bring books and a backpack for her to study. Hearing this, Faye's eyes filled with tears. She asked her mother if she still had to go to school, even in the middle of the apocalypse. Her mother gently comforted her and told her to listen to Lin Fan, explaining that education was still important. Faye responded by pouting and sulking at both of them. Her childish reaction made everyone laugh. From then on, 6 more people began living in Lin Fan's home, turning the once quiet apartment into a warm and lively place. Lin Fan told everyone to start eating while he stepped out to take out the trash and bring back Faye's books. Faye immediately protested, accusing him of making things difficult for her on purpose. As night fell, darkness covered the building. A dim green glow filled the streets outside, while a few stars appeared in the silent sky. Elsewhere in the city, mutated creatures that came out to hunt at night were suddenly shot down by a lone sniper. A young man wearing a black cap lowered his weapon after killing 2 mutants and said the area seemed relatively safe, though he noted that the ones hiding inside nearby shops would be harder to handle. A short-haired woman beside him suggested ignoring those mutants for now. She reported that they still had about 7 days of food and a stable water supply, adding that someone might still be maintaining the water plant. While they were discussing this, a loud explosion erupted nearby, sending smoke into the air. The sound quickly attracted mutants in the area, making the woman uneasy. Everyone turned toward the noise. Realizing the danger, she shouted that the explosion would draw the mutants and wondered who could have caused such chaos. Soon they saw a young woman running in terror while being chased by mutants. She cried out for help, but suddenly a gigantic arm appeared and crushed her instantly. The enormous creature roared loudly, as if claiming the territory. The sight left the woman pale. She realized the monster was a giant mutant and began wondering whether the mutants were evolving. At that moment, a trash bin suddenly clattered nearby, startling them. For a moment, she thought another giant mutant had appeared. Looking closer, she was shocked to see Lin Fan dragging the bin across the ground. The strange man they had met earlier seemed completely calm. He even apologized casually while passing the mutants as if nothing unusual was happening. He spoke to them as though chatting with acquaintances, inviting them out for a nighttime run. Then he suddenly drew his sword, and furious roars echoed through the area. Only then did the woman realize the disturbance had been caused by Lin Fan. The others stood stunned until they noticed the mutants being lured away from their position. They finally reacted, realizing they had narrowly avoided danger. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the dark surroundings of the Bu Mall supermarket. Lin Fan arrived at the place where he had dragged the trash bin. Catching his breath, he decided to leave it there for the moment and first retrieve Faye's backpack and books. From above, 4 strong young men who looked like street thugs watched him. They shouted down and asked what he was doing. Lin Fan calmly replied that he was simply looking for a place to throw away the trash because the bin at home was full. Before he could finish, the group interrupted him with laughter, mocking him for worrying about garbage during the apocalypse. Lin Fan responded casually that taking out the trash was normal and even asked if they needed help. One of the men laughed loudly, calling him an idiot and threatening that he could summon mutants with a single shout. Lin Fan simply waved and walked away. Feeling ignored, the men became irritated. After talking among themselves, they decided to deliberately attract mutants to see him chased away. Confident that they were safe on the 2nd floor, the group of young men began shouting loudly to attract mutants. After yelling for a while, however, the area suddenly fell silent. The unexpected quiet left them confused, wondering whether there were no mutants nearby and where they might have gone. From below, Lin Fan looked up and calmly told them not to rush, saying the mutants would arrive soon. After saying this, he casually walked into the building as if nothing unusual was happening. Hearing that remark, one of the youths angrily cursed him, while another complained that they had missed the chance to watch him being chased by mutants. Suddenly the ground began shaking, and loose gravel started falling around them. Panic spread through the group as they asked each other whether they had heard the strange sound. Moments later, a terrifying mutant appeared outside the ruined building, roaring loudly. Elsewhere, Lin Fan stood with a backpack and a long sword, remarking that the young men upstairs seemed to be surviving among zombies quite well. Just then, he heard a faint cry and immediately turned toward the sound. It resembled a child crying. Following the noise, he approached the Mountain Wild bookstore and wondered whether any children could still be alive inside. Climbing the steps carefully, he reached the entrance and was shocked to find a woman hanging from above, apparently having taken her own life. Her pale body hung motionless, and from her neck was tied a cloth bundle containing a baby. Lin Fan examined the situation closely and noticed that the child was still alive. Confused about why the woman would end her life while leaving the baby there, he hesitated. He briefly suspected it might be some kind of trap meant to lure someone close. After a moment of consideration, he decided to save the child. Carefully untying the cloth, he found the baby along with a small green notebook. The infant cried weakly from hunger. Lin Fan gently held the child, trying to comfort it, and let it suck his finger to calm down. While doing so, he noticed the pale green notebook and began reading. The diary described the mother's growing despair. She had written that no rescue had come, food had run out, and she knew she would soon die. Afraid that she might turn into a zombie and harm her child, she chose to end her own life first. In the diary, she explained that she had bound her mouth tightly, so that even if she transformed into a zombie, she would not be able to bite the baby. She wrote that the child's name was Mang Mang and begged whoever found them to help the baby survive. The mother admitted that raising a child during the apocalypse would be extremely difficult, but she still hoped someone might show kindness and save her daughter. After finishing the diary, Lin Fan quietly bowed toward the woman's body in respect and promised to protect the child. At that moment, a sudden noise echoed nearby. A basketball rolled across the floor toward him. Instantly alert, Lin Fan tightened his hold on the baby and watched the ball stop near his feet. A monstrous creature with 9 eyes suddenly rushed toward him, roaring as it attacked with its claws and fangs. Lin Fan barely avoided the first strike and quickly realized that the creature moved far faster than any zombie he had encountered before. The monster continued attacking. Holding the baby securely in one arm, Lin Fan drew his sword and prepared to strike. A thought briefly crossed his mind that the baby might have been used as bait to lure humans. When the creature lunged again, Lin Fan delivered a decisive slash. The blade cut through the mutant, splitting it apart. A system notification immediately announced that he had killed a speed-evolved zombie and gained 3 additional points. The baby remained asleep in his arms while Lin Fan stared at the creature's remains. Unlike ordinary zombies, this one seemed different. In the pool of blood where the body had split apart, he noticed a bright red stone embedded in its remains. Looking around at the surrounding shelves, Lin Fan realized the place had once been a bookstore. A thought came to him. Perhaps the creature had learned from the books inside. Knowledge, after all, could create power. With that explanation in mind, Lin Fan relaxed and began searching the bookstore shelves. He collected practice tests and workbooks, planning to bring them back for Faye, confident she would enjoy them. Elsewhere, in a desert region, an underground research base stood surrounded by dry land with only a few patches of greenery. Inside, a bald professor with a silver beard and glasses, wearing a white lab coat, carefully examined the red stone that had been brought back. His hands trembled as he asked whether the crystal had been taken from the brain of a mutated zombie. The young woman confirmed that the zombie they had encountered was unusual. After killing it, they had discovered the crystal inside its brain. The professor asked her to recount the entire event in detail. She explained that during the encounter she had fired 35 sniper shots from the south, repeatedly aiming at the zombie's head. Under normal circumstances, such attacks should have been fatal. However, despite the skull being pierced multiple times, the zombie continued attacking. It only collapsed after its head had been completely destroyed. Previously, every zombie they had faced could be killed easily, even with simple weapons. This case was completely different. The professor listened carefully while studying the red crystal in his hand. The incident confirmed his growing suspicion that zombies were evolving. If they could now survive severe head damage, humanity's remaining strongholds would become far more vulnerable. The young woman then suggested a bold idea. If the crystal inside the zombie's brain represented some form of evolution, perhaps it could also help humans evolve. Her speculation shocked the professor, who reacted with disbelief, comparing the idea to concepts found in zombie fiction. The scene then shifted back to the city. A woman cautiously peeked out from her window and was astonished to see someone moving openly outside. The streets were still filled with dangerous zombies, yet a person was calmly walking there. At that moment, Lin Fan suddenly looked upward. The woman panicked, quickly ducking down and covering her mouth, afraid that she had been noticed. She recognized the person below as Lin Fan. On his side, Lin Fan was also surprised to realize that there were still survivors nearby. Just then, the sound of an engine approached. A luxury vehicle stopped near the United Nations district. The people inside belonged to Hang Faction's gang. Lin Fan greeted them cheerfully, but soon noticed the strong smell of blood coming from a group. The gang members were surprised to see someone wandering outside alive and began considering how to deal with him. Their leader warned them not to cause unnecessary noise since they were on an important mission and would be punished by their boss if they failed. The driver, however, secretly considered using Lin Fan as bait for zombies. Before he could act, Lin Fan suddenly ran toward the car. Startled, the driver demanded to know what he was doing. Lin Fan simply replied that he was greeting them and was curious about what they were doing. The driver remained tense, disturbed by how quickly Lin Fan had appeared beside the vehicle. The others asked what was happening, and the driver quickly changed the subject by asking whether the item their boss requested had been secured. One of them tossed a red bag into the car, claiming they had obtained what was needed for survival. Curious about Lin Fan, one of them asked how he had managed to stay alive. Lin Fan answered simply that he talked to zombies, and if that did not work, he defended himself with his sword. The group was confused by the response. Suddenly, one of the men pointed a gun directly at Lin Fan and threatened him, asking whether he understood what was aimed at him. Lin Fan calmly guessed that they had just gone somewhere to steal firearms. The man angrily replied that in the apocalypse there was no such thing as theft and boasted about his ruthlessness. Before he could finish speaking, Lin Fan struck. With a single motion, he shattered the man's arm that held the gun. Lin Fan apologized coldly, saying he had become so used to cutting zombies that he briefly could not distinguish people. Another gang member panicked, drew his weapon, and shouted that Lin Fan had brought death upon himself. In the next instant, Lin Fan's blade cut him down. The remaining members were stunned by the speed of the attack, questioning whether Lin Fan was even human. Inside the car, the driver shouted angrily that the noise would attract zombies and ordered everyone to get in immediately. However, the others were too shocked to react quickly. The driver finally sped away alone, vowing to report the incident to their boss and seek revenge on Lin Fan. The gang members left behind ran after the departing car, shouting angrily that they had been abandoned. It was already too late. Lin Fan calmly sheathed his sword and remarked that even zombies seemed unwilling to tolerate criminals. Two of the men argued back, saying it was the smell of blood that attracted zombies. Suddenly, Lin Fan jumped onto the rooftop and left them with a final remark that justice might arrive late, but it would never be absent. He waved casually before leaving. Moments later, evolved zombies closed in on the remaining gang members. They panicked, pulling out their guns and shouting, but they had already lost the chance to escape. Desperate screams soon filled the area. Nearby, Sukio cautiously peeked out of her window to see what had caused the noise. From her experience, she guessed that a large number of zombies had gathered outside, likely drawn by someone moving around in the streets. She assumed that person had already been killed. Suddenly, Lin Fan appeared outside her window. Startled, Sukio froze in disbelief. She was on the second floor, yet his face had suddenly appeared right outside. She could not understand how he had reached that height. Lin Fan quietly watched while avoiding nearby zombies. Realizing the girl was frightened by the situation outside, he wanted to help but knew she needed time to calm down. Thinking he might have startled her, he decided that appearing occasionally might show her he meant no harm. Sukio, however, believed he might be dangerous. Gripping a knife in panic, she prepared to defend herself. Even though she was weak, she tried to appear brave. In her despair, she even considered ending her life rather than falling into the hands of someone she believed to be a villain. Elsewhere, at Huang Luxury Garden Landscape, a man rushed into a villa, shouting in panic. The bald man reported breathlessly that something had gone wrong. Defu, the leader, asked coldly what had happened. The man immediately knelt and explained that when they reached the police station, another group of survivors had appeared and led zombies there. In truth, the opposing side had only one person, but he hid this fact out of fear and blamed the large number of zombies as the reason he had fled alone. Seeing Defu remain silent made the bald man even more frightened. Remembering the leader's terrifying strength, he began sweating nervously. Defu calmly pressed down his cigar and asked why the man had returned alive. Understanding the danger of the situation, the man did not resist and repeatedly declared his loyalty, hoping to continue serving under him. Defu eventually spared him for the moment and ordered him to leave. The man quickly exited the villa while Defu silently considered the failure of the plan. He realized there might be another dangerous group within the Huang faction that he needed to watch carefully. The next day, under a clear sky with scattered clouds, life at Sunshine Community continued. Gai Jun carefully planted seeds near the house, thinking that the seeds Lin Fan had brought were not enough and that they would eventually need to gather more. Ajun asked Jongo to tie ropes to the wooden boards while requesting Old Wong to reinforce the structure. The old man happily agreed and helped with the work. Although still young, Fei enjoyed studying and asked if she could begin learning English. However, Liang Yin suggested that mathematics and science should be the priority for now. Fei obediently agreed. She soon noticed a large stack of books placed on the table. Lin Fan had brought them himself for her. Smiling, he reminded her not to become too excited, though he was pleased to see her enthusiasm for studying. Fei became emotional and began crying with joy, leaving Lin Fan unsure whether she was simply moved or overwhelmed. At that moment, the baby in Lin Fan's arms began crying. Fei's mother asked about the child, and Lin Fan briefly explained how he had found the baby. He then asked Liang Yin, who had experience as a military medic, to check the child's condition. She immediately agreed and carefully examined the baby. While treating the child, unusual red patches appeared on the infant's body. Liang Yin explained that the baby had been saved because the problem was discovered early. However, due to weak immunity and infection, the child would require careful treatment and protection. When asked the baby's name, Lin Fan explained that the only information he had came from the mother's diary, which stated that the child was called Mang Mang. Liang Yin suggested giving the baby the surname Lin, but Lin Fan refused. He wanted to respect the wish written in the mother's diary and planned to tell Mang Mang about her brave mother when the child grew older. Because of her experience, Fei's mother volunteered to take care of Mang Mang. She explained that Lin Fan was still young and that she was already used to raising children. Lin Fan accepted the help and said he would assist whenever necessary. At that moment, a sudden alarm interrupted them. Lin Fan turned immediately and asked what had happened. Zongo reported anxiously that the situation outside had escalated and that many zombies had appeared on the street. Lin Fan was surprised because he clearly remembered losing them earlier. What worried him more was the possibility that the zombies were evolving and becoming more intelligent. Outside the complex, a truck sped down the road while a large group of mutated creatures chased behind it. The driver, Chen He, seemed indifferent to the danger and continued driving steadily. Zongo quickly noticed that the vehicle was honking deliberately to attract zombies. Ajuan immediately realized that this was likely a strategy used by scavenging teams. One vehicle would lure zombies away so that another group could safely collect supplies. Lin Fan had also noticed the unusual behavior and confirmed the same suspicion. Another group soon appeared on the street, calmly carrying weapons while gathering supplies. However, the longer Ajuan observed, the more uneasy she became. She pointed out that the truck had suspiciously turned around. Lin Fan suddenly understood what was happening. Chenny suddenly accelerated the truck and drove directly toward the group collecting supplies. Only then did they realize that he was intentionally leading the zombies toward them. Inside the truck, Chenny calmly lit a cigarette as memories filled his mind. He remembered the happy life he once had with his wife and daughter before the apocalypse. When the disaster began, he had taken the risk of going outside to find food for them. During one attempt, he had nearly been killed by zombies before being saved by two strangers in a truck. At first, he believed they were good people after watching them efficiently eliminate zombies. Hoping to protect his family, he begged them for food after they refused to let him travel with them. However, when he later followed them with his family, he discovered their true nature. They humiliated his wife in front of him while he was tied up and powerless to intervene. His daughter was held hostage, leaving him no choice but to submit. Forced to watch the tragedy unfold, he was filled with helpless anger. The hatred he had carried ever since led him to this moment. Determined to destroy the cruel group, he pressed the accelerator, no longer caring whether he survived. The truck crashed toward them, and the front of the vehicle suddenly exploded violently. Seeing the explosion, Lin Fan decided to go outside and check the situation. Zongo called out for him to stop, but Lin Fan had already rushed toward the scene. When he arrived, a large group of mutated creatures had already surrounded the vehicle. Before acting, Lin Fan raised his voice and warned the creatures to leave the area because elderly people, women, and children were inside the complex. The mutants could not understand his words and immediately attacked him. Realizing that talking was useless, Lin Fan struck one down as a warning. Ajuin and Zhonggo watched in shock as Lin Fan quickly eliminated the attacking mutants. His strength seemed far beyond that of an ordinary human, making them wonder whether he might represent humanity's hope in rebuilding civilization. Within a short time, the mutants were all defeated. Lin Fan then asked about Chenny's condition. They discovered that he had only minor injuries. Guyan explained that the truck's airbag had protected him and that his wounds were not serious. Lin Fan felt relieved after hearing this. He had chosen to save Chenhe because if Chenhe had caused this chaos, he believed the man should live to face the consequences himself. Gofen sensed something unusual about Lin Fan's reasoning, but could not find a way to argue against it. Chenhe slowly regained consciousness, confused and wondering whether he had died and somehow arrived in heaven. Lin Fan calmly explained to Chenhe that he was not in heaven, but in Sunshine residential area. Although concerned about his condition, Lin Fan still told him he had to take responsibility for the chaos he had caused and help clean up the zombie corpses on the street. Chenhe thanked everyone for saving him and introduced himself. He then urgently explained that his daughter had been taken by the people he had tried to attack earlier and that he needed to rescue her immediately. Lin Fan suspected Chenhe might be trying to avoid responsibility for the trouble he had caused, so he proposed an exchange. Chenhe would stay behind and clear the streets while Lin Fan would go rescue the girl. The suggestion left Chenhe completely bewildered. Soon after, Lin Fan appeared with the little girl he had rescued. Still stunned, she asked if he was really the man her father had sent to pick her up. Lin Fan gently patted her head to reassure her and joked that he was simply someone her father had hired for a small payment to bring her back safely. At that moment, Suk Xiao looked out from a nearby window and saw Lin Fan again. She was shocked to see him standing outside with a young girl around 8 or 9 years old. Misunderstanding the situation, she assumed he might be harming others. Lin Fan happened to glance up and noticed Suk Xiao watching from the window. Instead of reacting negatively, he simply smiled and waved at her. Suk Xiao immediately panicked and hid, convinced that he had noticed her. She quickly pulled the curtains closed, fearing that the man she believed to be dangerous had discovered her hiding place. Inside the room, Suk Xiao began crying quietly, imagining terrible things might happen to the girl she had seen with him. Lin Fan, meanwhile, scratched his head in confusion. He could not understand the strange reaction of the survivor and wondered if the apocalypse had unsettled her mind. He reminded himself to stay cautious around people who seemed unstable. Outside, mutated creatures continued roaming through the streets in chaotic groups. In a nearby vehicle, a man wearing a hat watched the situation nervously. Their boss soon began paying attention to the unusual scene outside. The man recognized Lin Fan and quickly told the boss that the strange survivor was openly walking outside with a child. Meanwhile, Lin Fan stopped in front of a toy shop and cheerfully asked the girl if she wanted a toy. The child pressed her hands against the glass and nodded excitedly. Watching from a distance, the group worried that if the zombies noticed them, neither Lin Fan nor the girl would survive. The boss immediately ordered his men to honk the car horn to lure the zombies away. Old Mao prepared to follow the order. However, before they could act, music suddenly began playing nearby. The sound came from a toy that started repeating a song the girl liked. The music quickly attracted the surrounding mutants. Their red eyes glowed as they rushed toward the sound in a frenzy. Lin Fan remained unaware of the danger forming behind him. Inside the vehicle, the man in the hat began sweating. He realized that Lin Fan had unintentionally led a massive group of zombies toward their position. The boss and the others fell silent as they understood that the situation had become completely unpredictable. Far away at the desert research base, a scientist excitedly reported that the analysis of the crystal taken from a zombie's brain had been completed. According to the results, the crystal did not match any known material. The professor immediately asked about its energy stability. The researcher explained that biochemical analysis showed the crystal was extremely stable. Its outer structure resembled a combination of flesh and glass, but was far harder than either. Despite their advanced equipment, they still could not determine the crystal's true function. The professor asked whether other research bases, such as Dragon Palace and Milky Way, had discovered similar crystals. Unfortunately, The researcher reported that those bases had found none. It appeared that only certain special zombies possessed these crystals. The professor grew concerned. If zombies were evolving and humanity had no method to counter them, the future would be extremely uncertain. Meanwhile, under a bright blue sky with drifting clouds, another group gathered on the rooftop of the Hang residential complex. One of them shouted with excitement after finally obtaining what they had been searching for. Their leader, Jiang Hao, proudly confirmed that the crystal truly existed just like the ones described in novels, although 7 of his teammates had died obtaining it. Jiang Hao believed that swallowing the crystal would give him extraordinary power, allowing him to grow stronger by killing zombies and eventually dominate the apocalypse. Convinced that his moment had arrived, he opened his mouth and prepared to swallow the crystal. Jiang Hao completely believed the crystal would grant him supernatural power. In his mind, it would make him the ruler of the apocalypse and allow him to fulfill every desire. After swallowing it, he stood there breathing heavily with his mouth open, waiting for the transformation to begin. Nothing happened. Panic slowly appeared on his face when he realized his body showed no change. Thinking the crystal might not work the way the stories described, Jiang Hao suddenly felt sharp pain in his stomach. Even so, he forced himself to believe it was a sign that the power was awakening inside him. He collapsed to the ground, clutching his stomach while enduring intense agony, convincing himself that if he could survive the pain, a glorious future awaited him. Moments later, he spat out a mouthful of blood. The crystal had not granted him power at all. Jiang Hao died shortly afterward, still filled with unwillingness. Back at Sunshine residential area, Chenny tightly hugged his daughter. The little girl, Ding Ding, cried in fear while repeatedly calling for her father. Her mother looked nervously at Lin Fan when she saw that he was covered in blood. Lin Fan quickly reassured her that the blood belonged to zombies and that he was not injured. Zongo patted Lin Fan on the shoulder and jokingly reminded Chenhee to pay properly, saying that Lin Fan had completed the job efficiently and deserved his payment. Chenhee took out some money, handed it to Lin Fan, and quietly thanked him. Lin Fan accepted the payment without hesitation, feeling that it was a fair exchange and that there was no need for further formality. Chenhee understood that money had little practical value in the apocalypse, but he was still grateful that Lin Fan accepted it. Chenhee then leaned closer to Zongo and quietly asked whether the old man was hiding something unusual about Lin Fan. Zongo replied that everything made sense. Paying for someone's work was simply proper behavior, and even during the apocalypse their community maintained order. In his view, only order could preserve hope for the future. Ajuan added that Chenhee should not think too deeply about it. Many people had once misunderstood Lin Fan, but they had gradually realized that his way of thinking was simply different. She admitted that even her own view of him had begun to change. Although Chenhee did not completely understand their perspective, he felt that the older generation's thinking carried something special. At that moment, the sound of a bell echoed in the distance. Zongo recognized it as the bell from the clock tower on Sunward Road. It was exactly noon. Someone had deliberately set the bell to ring, likely to attract zombies and create a chance for survivors to gather supplies elsewhere. Ajuan felt encouraged by the idea, believing that whoever had done it must have been kind. To her, it showed that the apocalypse had not completely erased hope. Soon afterward, a large group of zombies rushed through the streets toward the sound. The bell had successfully drawn most of the swarm away. Elsewhere, a scavenging team watched the situation and praised the plan, saying that ringing the bell at noon each day will be the perfect time to collect supplies. Their leader, however, remained cautious. She warned that zombies would eventually adapt and that such a tactic would not work forever. Not wanting to waste time, she ordered the group to act quickly. They had only 2 minutes to gather as many supplies as possible. Suddenly the ground began shaking violently, causing their vehicle to tremble as if during an earthquake. Alarmed, one of the men turned to the boss and said something was wrong. A gigantic monster soon appeared, easily throwing aside nearby mutants. The creature resembled a towering green giant. With one hand it lifted a mutant and hurled it away. Then, gathering momentum, it leaped toward the clock tower. Grabbing the top of the tower to steady itself, the monster roared loudly and raised both arms. Without warning, it smashed the clock tower. The structure collapsed instantly. Seeing this, the boss realized that the situation had changed. Some zombies had clearly evolved intelligence. The thought frightened her. If the creatures continued evolving, humanity's future, and civilization itself, might face an even darker fate. Meanwhile, Under a bright sky where white clouds drifted peacefully, Zongo also noticed the distant incident. The clock tower bell had stopped ringing before completing 12 strikes. Something must have happened there. For a moment, it seemed as though the fragile hope represented by the bell had vanished. Yet Zongo refused to lose faith. In his heart, he believed that hope still existed. He had already placed his trust in Lin Fan, believing that even in the apocalypse, hope could survive if someone discovered it, protected it, and passed it on to others. Old Wang explained that greater power brings greater responsibility. If everyone only cared about themselves, humanity would eventually perish. He believed that someone needed to unite people's strength and faith, and he trusted Lin Fan could become that person. After all, a single individual's strength was limited, but a group working together could create real hope. However, Lin Fan looked completely confused and admitted he did not understand what Old Wang meant. Realizing he had spoken too abstractly, Wang blamed himself for forgetting how straightforward Lin Fan's thinking was. He decided to explain in a simpler way. Wang then gave a practical example. He suggested that Lin Fan could act as a kind of helper for others, taking small jobs and assisting people while earning extra money. Hearing this, Lin Fan's eyes immediately lit up. The idea of doing side work and making money excited him. Without hesitation, he ran off to start looking for opportunities. Gofen still felt uneasy about the conversation, but Wang explained that he had not been deceiving Lin Fan. In his view, it was simply guidance given at the right moment. Lin Fan was the strongest person he had ever seen, and Wang quietly looked up at the sky, believing that Lin Fan might represent humanity's last hope. Later in the city, rows of tall buildings stretched across the skyline. Lin Fan suddenly turned his head after hearing the sound of a car engine nearby. A flashy car stopped beside him. Inside was the purple-haired man he had encountered earlier, who enthusiastically invited Lin Fan into the car and even called him brother, despite them being strangers. Lin Fan politely declined, explaining that he was busy and already had a place to stay. The driver seemed irritated and quickly sped away. The green-haired girl inside the car worried that the engine noise might attract zombies and put Lin Fan in danger, but the purple-haired man simply replied that in the apocalypse people could only help others within limits, and Lin Fan had refused their offer anyway. Looking in the rearview mirror, he remarked that Lin Fan seemed a bit unusual. Not long after, a group of mutated zombies rushed into the area, moving much faster than before. Lin Fan felt tired of constantly fighting zombies every day, but he had no choice. Even so, the mutated creatures still posed little threat to him. After clearing them out, Lin Fan felt relieved. He suspected that zombies were evolving, but he himself was also becoming stronger because of the system. While thinking about this, he noticed something unusual on a nearby window. A red sign drawn on the glass caught his attention. It was clearly a distress signal. Inside the room, a young woman named Ninai was hiding in a corner. She was a 19-year-old dance streamer who lived in Hongda Prestige Garden. Before the apocalypse, she had been confident in her talent and popularity online. After the disaster began, she had survived by relying on the food she had stored at home. One day, her agent knocked on her door, but she noticed that his brother, Liu Bing, was with him. Knowing that Liu Bing had a reputation as a reckless playboy, she became uneasy. In the chaos of the apocalypse, she feared her agent might side with him. Terrified, Nanai refused to open the door despite their attempts to persuade her. Now, however, her food supplies were almost gone, and she faced the risk of starving. Outside the apartment on the 16th floor, the thug impatiently complained to his sister about Nanai's refusal to open the door. His real intention was obvious. He wanted to take advantage of her. The sister did nothing to stop him, and even argued that in the apocalypse there were no laws or consequences anymore. The thug tried to force the door open, but the security door was too strong to break easily. Suddenly he paused, raising his hand to signal silence. He thought he had heard something outside. The woman also became nervous, wondering if zombies had appeared nearby, but she was too afraid to check. Soon someone approached apartment 1705 and knocked on the door. Inside, Nanai became even more frightened and begged repeatedly not to be disturbed. Overwhelmed by fear, she covered her ears, trying to calm herself as despair set in. Outside, Lin Fan had come to investigate the distress signal. Hearing movement inside, he realized someone might be in danger. Deciding he could not ignore it, he struck the metal door with enough force to knock it off its hinges. Before he could explain anything, he came face to face with Nanai. Lin Fan tried to reassure her, but she immediately raised a knife in self-defense. With the door suddenly broken open during the apocalypse, she had no reason to trust him. Unexpectedly, Lin Fan recognized her as a dance streamer he had once watched online and even supported financially out of admiration. Misunderstanding his intentions, Nanai became even more frightened. Believing he might harm her, she threatened to hurt herself to keep him away, determined not to fall victim to anyone in the chaos of the apocalypse. Lin Fan immediately raised both hands to show he meant no harm. He introduced himself as an agent and explained that he had broken the door only because he saw the distress signal and feared she might be in danger. Nanai hesitated. She did not know whether to trust him, especially after seeing the strength he used to break the security door. At the same time, Lin Fan quietly noticed the doubt in her expression and felt encouraged. To him, that hesitation meant her initial resistance was weakening. He quickly took the opportunity to persuade her. Acting serious, he produced a flyer and began introducing his brokerage work. He suggested that she consider moving to Sunshine Residential Area, explaining that it was stable, relatively safe, and filled with reliable residents. He listed the types of people living there: doctors, teachers, soldiers, military specialists, and network technicians. He also mentioned facilities such as training areas and small cultivation plots. When discussing the rent, he emphasized that the prices were reasonable, presenting it as the key point. The rapid explanation left Nanai completely stunned. She was so surprised that she could not respond. Meanwhile, Lin Fan interpreted her change of expression from fear to surprise as a sign that she was gradually accepting him. Softening his voice, he tried to reassure her. He said that it was normal to feel afraid during the apocalypse, but that people should still believe in good things. Slowly, he asked her to lower the knife and handed her the flyer, suggesting she read it carefully and think about it. Still dazed, Nanai lowered the knife and took the paper. After a moment, she regained her composure and demanded to know his true identity. Lin Fan calmly repeated that he was a broker and once again recommended Sunshine Residential Area. Adopting a professional tone, he invited her to sit down and discuss the details. In his mind, this was a sign she had already accepted the idea. He began describing the apartments, comparing different layouts and facilities, and eventually suggested a larger unit that would suit her needs. While explaining this option, he mentioned that the previous tenant had been another woman who had recently moved out. At that point, Nanai became suspicious. Her reaction irritated Lin Fan slightly, as he felt misunderstood despite trying to help. He turned as if to leave, but she quickly stopped him and apologized repeatedly for her remark. After a moment, he accepted the apology. Even so, Nanai remained cautious. She asked directly whether he always behaved so strangely. Quickly clarifying that she meant no offense, she explained she was simply worried. Lin Fan responded seriously, saying that many people had abandoned order when the apocalypse began, which had only made things worse. In his view, the most frightening thing was not zombies, but humans themselves. He explained that he continued living according to his old habits because he still had the ability to do so. Nanai grew nervous but realized she had little choice. Staying alone would likely lead to starvation, and despite his unusual behavior, leaving with him seemed like the only chance to survive. When Lin Fan asked about the rental decision, she quickly agreed. He told her to pack her belongings immediately. She was surprised when he reminded her to bring important items such as identification documents, bank cards, and cash. He even mentioned that the rent for the apartment was about 800 yuan per month. Nanai was unsure whether he was pretending not to understand the situation or genuinely thinking this way. 10 minutes later, she finished packing. Lin Fan was surprised by how little she carried. Putting on her coat, Nanai anxiously explained that the people downstairs were dangerous and that leaving the building might not be easy. Lin Fan confidently reassured her, reminding her of the strength he had shown when breaking the door. As they reached the exit, however, a man suddenly appeared and blocked their path. Nanai's face turned pale with fear. The thug pulled out a knife and threatened them, saying he would take her or make them pay. Lin Fan simply smiled coldly, which angered the man further. Calmly, Lin Fan apologized and asked how exactly the man intended to make him regret it. Before the thug could react, Lin Fan moved. In a single motion, he snatched the knife from the man's hand. The speed of the action stunned him. He stepped back in shock, unable to say a word. His face turned pale as he realized the weapon had been taken instantly. Lin Fan then calmly explained that threatening others with a knife was dangerous and illegal, speaking as if he were giving a lesson. Nanai stood beside him, stunned and speechless. After finishing, Lin Fan returned the knife to the man and advised him not to do such things again. He warned that if someone attacked him, the consequences could be serious. The thug stood there completely confused, unable to understand what had just happened. At that moment, a woman appeared nearby. Nanai immediately recognized her as Liu Hong. For a moment, she remembered how she had once trusted Liu Hong like a sister. Nanai remembered how Liu Hong had once treated her like family. But after the apocalypse began, everything had changed. Liu Hong had sided with her son and joined in humiliating her. After a brief silence, Lin Fan calmly suggested that they leave. Just as they were about to go, the thug stepped forward and blocked their path again, ordering them to stop. Lin Fan slowly turned back. His expression became cold as he asked what the problem was. The man, unwilling to let Nanai go, began speaking crudely and hinted at his intentions. Lin Fan immediately responded, criticizing his disrespect toward women. The thug then tried to frighten Nanai. He described terrible situations she might face outside and insisted that the apocalypse had no laws anymore. According to him, staying with him was the safest choice. Nanai hid behind Lin Fan and firmly refused. She declared that she would rather die than stay there. Furious, the man blamed everything on Lin Fan and convinced himself that the situation had gone wrong because he had hesitated earlier. In a sudden outburst, he rushed forward, shouting as he tried to attack Lin Fan with the knife. Nanai could only shout warnings from behind, unable to help. Liu Hong watched quietly from the side, waiting for the moment when she and her son could overpower them. However, before anything could happen, her son was suddenly thrown backward. His body slammed hard into the wall and remained stuck there. Liu Hong cried out in shock when she saw what had happened. Lin Fan simply replied that it was not his fault. He had only defended himself. Nanai was stunned. Seeing Lin Fan defeat Liu Bing instantly made her realize how powerful he truly was. Once everything settled, Lin Fan calmly turned and told Nanai to follow him. Behind them, only the injured siblings remained, struggling in confusion and pain. As they walked away, Nanai nervously asked about the injured man. Lin Fan casually explained that the man had attacked first, so he had simply defended himself. Still shaken by what she had witnessed, Nanai asked again about Lin Fan's identity. Slightly annoyed, he repeated that he was only a real estate agent. Nanai secretly suspected that he might be someone hiding extraordinary abilities like characters in films. Lin Fan patiently explained that besides working as a broker, he also served as a kind of guard in the building to maintain order and earn a living during the apocalypse. She was surprised to hear that and asked if he did other work as well. Lin Fan admitted that he sometimes took on additional small jobs to earn extra income. In Nanai's mind, however, these explanations only reinforced her belief that he was secretly some powerful figure. Feeling lucky to have met him, she suddenly burst into excited laughter. Lin Fan misunderstood the reaction and assumed she was simply a slightly strange girl. When they arrived back at Sunshine residential area, Zongo came out to greet them warmly. He smiled and patted Lin Fan on the shoulder, joking that young people should spend time talking with beautiful girls while they still had the energy. Seeing that Lin Fan did not understand the hint, Zongo leaned closer and jokingly told him to imagine being old and still try to flirt with young women. Lin Fan briefly imagined himself as an old man being rejected by younger girls because of the age difference, which immediately gave him goosebumps. He quickly rejected the idea. Not long after, a gentle voice from inside the house called everyone to come and eat. Lin Fan introduced Nanai to the others. First, he introduced Faye's mother and her daughter Faye. Faye greeted her politely and even complimented Nanai's beauty, which made her blush. To ease the awkwardness, Nanai lightly patted Faye's head and returned the compliment. Next, Lin Fan introduced Chinhee and his daughter Ding Ding. Nanai greeted them cheerfully. He then introduced the 4 elderly residents. Nanai greeted them respectfully, and the elders warmly welcomed her. Some of them even joked about Lin Fan having a good eye for people, which embarrassed Nanai so much that her face and ears turned red. The young mother soon invited everyone to sit down at the table. Faye excitedly took her seat first. The table was filled with dishes that everyone had grown and prepared themselves. After tasting the food, Nanai praised the cooking. Faye's mother smiled and said that meals like this had become very precious during the apocalypse. Gradually, Nanai relaxed. For the first time since the disaster began, she felt a sense of warmth and believed that following Lin Fan had been the right choice. During the meal, Zongo asked Nanai about the water source she had previously used. As a former soldier, he considered water supply a critical matter and wanted to understand the situation clearly. Nanai explained that she had once been worried the tap water might be contaminated. However, when her thirst became unbearable, she tried drinking it and discovered that it seemed safe. Chenhe analyzed the situation and suggested that if the tap water was still drinkable, it would be extremely good news for survivors. Zongo thought more deeply about it. He explained that tap water normally goes through several treatment stages before reaching the city, and its current clarity suggested something unusual. This led him to suspect that someone might still be secretly operating the water treatment system. Ajun agreed with this idea. If survivors were maintaining the water plant, then they were valuable people whose efforts should not go to waste. They would need food and protection in return. Lin Fan immediately volunteered to investigate. He said he knew where the water plant was and could check it. Hearing this, Nanai became worried and asked whether it would be safe. While calmly eating, Lin Fan replied that even if it was dangerous, he still had to go. Water was essential for survival, and anyone maintaining the water supply deserved help and a better life. After the meal, Lin Fan stood up to prepare for the trip. As usual, he asked if anyone needed him to bring back anything. One by one, the others handed him money and asked him to buy necessities if he found them. Nanai once again asked about Lin Fan's true identity. Zongo only smiled and told her that she would understand it gradually on her own. The scene then shifted to the Huang Corporation water treatment plant. Inside a dirty control room, a thin and exhausted man sat alone. The cramped environment had worn him down physically and mentally. The man was Wang Kai, the manager of the water plant. Speaking softly to his dog, Wang Kai admitted that his spirit was close to breaking. Sometimes he even imagined seeing a door of light, as if hope was calling to him. He reminded himself that he was just an ordinary man who wanted to escape through the water pipes and find safety somewhere else. However, he could not leave. If he abandoned the plant, the city's water supply would stop. As if understanding him, the dog stayed beside him. To continue maintaining the system, Wang Kai had come up with a risky method. He strapped a small music device to the dog so it would attract zombies. The dog then ran outside, drawing the zombies away while Wang Kai quickly inspected the machines. Although he survived mostly on dog food, he continued checking the equipment regularly to keep the water flowing. Encouraging himself, he thought that if a dog could keep trying, then a human should not give up either. Following his instructions, the dog ran as far away from the plant as possible to lure the zombies. While doing so, it suddenly noticed something unusual. A speed-evolved zombie was silently following it. Realizing the danger, the dog ran desperately. Eventually, it was cornered and could only tremble on the ground, waiting for the attack. At that moment, a familiar bicycle rolled onto the road nearby. Lin Fan stopped beside the frightened dog and looked at the zombie with surprise. He casually waved and greeted it as if meeting someone familiar. The zombie immediately turned toward him with a roar. Lin Fan calmly told it that he meant no harm, though his hand moved toward the hilt of his sword. When the zombie attacked, he responded instantly. With one precise strike, he eliminated the evolved zombie. A crystal fell from the creature, and the sword absorbed it, strengthening the weapon further. Lin Fan lightly brushed the blade afterward, complaining that the zombie had chosen a dangerous opponent. The dog, realizing it had been saved, ran toward him happily, as if accepting him as its new master. Lin Fan crouched down and patted the dog's head. Smiling, he asked whether it could lead him to other survivors. The dog immediately began running, guiding him toward the place where Wang Kai was hiding. Along the way, Lin Fan cleared obstacles and dangers from the path. He quietly admired how intelligent the dog seemed. However, when they reached the location, the place appeared empty. No one was visible. The dog ran back and forth anxiously before returning to Lin Fan. He patted it again and told it to keep leading the way. The dog quickly continued forward. Meanwhile, inside a sterilization room filled with the smell of chlorine, Wang Kai collapsed from exhaustion. Holding his head in frustration, he worried about what might have happened to his dog after their encounter with the zombies. Wang Kai sat in the sterilization room, struggling with a difficult decision. If he went outside, he might face danger from zombies. But if he stayed inside, his dog, still outside, would likely die. Just as he was at his lowest point, he suddenly heard the familiar sound of his dog barking. He immediately tried to convince himself that it was only a hallucination, since the dog could not possibly be there. Then a voice called from outside, asking whether anyone was inside. Startled, Wang Kai flinched, believing his hallucinations were becoming worse. A moment later, the inner door was suddenly broken open. Lin Fan stepped inside with a polite smile, introduced himself, and explained that he had come to search for survivors and meant no harm. Wang Kai immediately broke down in tears. He believed everything in front of him was an illusion and that he was about to die. Seeing his panic, Lin Fan crouched down and calmly reassured him that he was safe. Wang Kai stared at him in disbelief, struggling to accept that what he was seeing was real. Finally, overwhelmed with emotion, Wang Kai hugged Lin Fan tightly while crying. Lin Fan quietly returned the embrace, feeling that he could not abandon someone who had continued serving the city by maintaining the water supply. Lin Fan brought Wang Kai and the dog back to Sunshine residential area. He prepared hot food for him, knowing that Wang Kai had been surviving mostly on dog food. At the table, Ding Ding curiously asked Fei why Wang Kai was eating so much real food. Fei joked that it looked as if he had been born just to eat plain rice. Lin Fan then noticed something and asked Fei why Ding Ding, who was older, was calling her sister. Fei laughed and explained that recently Lin Fan had often helped her, so being called sister was not really wrong. Nearby, the dog watched quietly while Wang Kai ate rapidly. The dog seemed confused, remembering that earlier they had been sharing dog food together. After finishing a bowl, Wang Kai awkwardly apologized for eating so much. Fei's mother simply smiled and told him that being able to eat was fortunate. She added gently that the guest had arrived unexpectedly, so the meal had not been prepared carefully and hoped he would not mind. Zongo stepped forward, patted Wang Kai on the shoulder, and praised him for maintaining the city's water supply. Wang Kai modestly replied that it had simply been his responsibility. Zongo smiled and said that such responsibility had saved many people, because in the apocalypse water was the most important condition for survival. Lin Fan then suggested that Wang Kai move to Sunshine residential area and offered to help him find an apartment since he worked as a broker. The proposal left Wang Kai speechless. Zongo explained further that Lin Fan could help him rent a place at a low price. Even during the apocalypse, paying rent was still normal and reasonable. Despite the explanation, Wang Kai remained confused, feeling that he understood part of it, but not completely. Fei's mother patiently tried to clarify things, but Wang Kai admitted he still did not fully grasp the idea. Zongo patted his shoulder again and praised him as an ordinary person who had stepped forward when needed. Those words made Wang Kai pause. Zongo then reflected on his younger days in the military, remembering a teammate who had always seemed timid but had sacrificed himself at a crucial moment. That memory taught him that people were complex, both fear and courage existed within them, and the strength shown at critical moments could exceed imagination. Hearing this, Wang Kai finally understood what he meant. He realized that Zongo's experience allowed him to see things more clearly. At that moment, Lin Fan stepped forward in a very businesslike manner and said he had an empty apartment available on the 5th floor, room 504. He offered to show it to Wang Kai and mentioned that the rent would be 400 yuan per month, payable in cash or by card. Lin Fan's enthusiasm made Wang Kai even more embarrassed. In truth, he felt grateful but worried that he could not afford rent in the apocalypse. Seeing the situation become awkward, Zongo stepped in again. He offered to temporarily pay the rent with his own card and said Wang Kai could repay him later after receiving wages from the water plant. The idea surprised Wang Kai even more. He could hardly believe that the concept of wages still existed in the apocalypse. After thinking for a moment, Wang Kai suddenly remembered something important. He quickly asked Lin Fan whether they had any way to deal with zombies. Lin Fan simply pointed at himself and confidently declared that he was very strong and that everyone there had already witnessed it. Zongo immediately nodded in agreement and signaled for Wang Kai to believe him. Wang Kai looked around at the others, and they all nodded without hesitation. Nanai felt that Lin Fan's strength was not just impressive but almost beyond imagination. Overwhelmed, Wang Kai suddenly knelt before him and begged him to accompany him to inspect the water plant every noon. The plant required daily supervision, and he could no longer face the danger alone. Lin Fan simply yawned and replied that it would not be a problem. After agreeing, he casually said that if there was nothing else to discuss, he would return to his room to rest. Once Lin Fan left, Wang Kai turned to Zongo and asked about Lin Fan's true identity. Zongo answered calmly that in dangerous times, heroes often appear unexpectedly. A person's origin was not important. What mattered was that Sunshine residential area had become a refuge and a source of hope for everyone there, and that was also Lin Fan's intention. Hearing this explanation, Wang Kai slowly nodded in understanding. Later that night, the atmosphere at the Desert Research Base became serious. Reports from the Dragon Palace and Hainan bases had been compiled. The data showed that crystals extracted from mutated zombies had produced no positive results after multiple experiments. In one test, a volunteer soldier swallowed a crystal. The outcome was disastrous. Recordings showed that after the crystal entered the body, the subject's flesh and blood began changing violently. Within 3 minutes, the volunteer died from massive blood loss. The researchers concluded that swallowing the crystal was ineffective and extremely dangerous. Adjusting her glasses, the lead scientist explained that the human body could not tolerate the crystal's energy. She then presented updated information about different zombie types that had been recorded so far. The first category was the strength type. These zombies possessed extremely powerful bursts of force. Tests showed that a strength-type zombie could overturn a 2-ton vehicle due to its dense muscle growth. Conventional weapons were often ineffective, and even headshots sometimes failed to penetrate their bones. The second category was the speed type. These zombies moved rapidly, climbed efficiently, and had extremely high agility. A speed-type zombie could run at nearly 150 kilometers per hour without showing fatigue, making direct encounters extremely dangerous. Another type was the screaming zombie. These creatures could emit powerful sound waves that caused severe pain and disorientation in humans. Their screams carried over long distances and attracted other zombies. Observations showed that the volume of their cries increased significantly within a few days. The story then shifted to another location where a small group of survivors had gathered. Guang Hai introduced himself as a former military officer who had served for 9 years. Shortly after returning home from service, the apocalypse had begun and zombies appeared across the world. His group now consisted of only 6 survivors, including himself, 4 women and 1 man, along with a pregnant woman and her husband. Others had separated earlier due to disagreements, and no one knew whether they were still alive. A thin, anxious man asked Guang Hai about the situation outside. Guang Hai could only shake his head and admit that things were not going well. He then turned to the pregnant woman. Her husband explained that her condition had improved slightly, but that the baby might be born soon, which worried him deeply. Before he could finish speaking, Guang Hai placed a hand on his shoulder and reassured him that he would help however he could. Deep down, he knew there was no real solution. Giving birth during the apocalypse meant no hospital assistance and the risk of attracting zombies. Guang Hai told everyone to remain inside while he went out to search for supplies. The husband offered to accompany him, but Guang Hai refused. He explained that he was physically stronger and more capable of escaping danger if necessary. Reluctantly, the husband agreed and asked him to be careful. Guang Hai replied that he would retreat immediately if he encountered zombies. The husband said that zombies were not what worried him most. Recently, he had heard rumors spreading among survivors. According to these stories, there was a mysterious swordsman who wandered among swarms of zombies. Some people had given the figure dramatic titles, such as the Spirit of the Apocalypse. Guang Hai listened but dismissed the rumors, thinking they sounded exaggerated and unreliable. Meanwhile, back at the warm residence of Sunshine Residential Area, Zhongguo asked about Lin Fan's daily routine. Lin Fan calmly listed his many tasks, helping residents, collecting supplies, handling small jobs, and maintaining order. Hearing this, Zhongguo laughed and remarked that in the middle of the apocalypse, Lin Fan might be the busiest person around. Perhaps, he said, that constant activity was also a sign of hope. In another corner of the house, Lang Yin patiently continued teaching the 2 children, guiding them through their studies despite the uncertain world outside. The young mother helped everyone in the residence with enthusiasm. Madame Su welcomed her warmly because they were short-handed and the atmosphere remained friendly. After finishing her run, Nanai walked alongside Lin Fan and addressed him politely using formal terms. She soon became dissatisfied and asked him to call her more casually, suggesting names like Xiao Nan or Na and I. Lin Fan verbally agreed, but continued using the formal way of addressing her, leaving Nanai unsure how to respond. While walking, Nanai repeated something Mr. Wang had once said, that hope still existed and that the Huang faction could eventually rebuild order. She then asked Lin Fan whether he believed this was possible. Lin Fan asked her what she thought first. Nanai smiled and looked directly at him. She admitted that she had not believed such ideas before, but after meeting the people in Sunshine Residential Area, she had begun to feel that hope might truly exist. Lin Fan laughed lightly and said that she had already found her own answer. If someone kept their faith, results would eventually appear. After a moment, Nanai asked a question she had been thinking about for a long time. She wanted to know why Lin Fan still focused on doing business and earning money during the apocalypse, especially when the outside world was filled with looters and chaos. Lin Fan replied that if people completely abandoned order now, then even if society eventually recovered, it might be too late to rebuild what had been lost. His answer revealed that he was thinking about the long-term future rather than only the present. Hearing this, Nanai gradually began to understand what Mr. Wong had meant about Lin Fan. She soon changed the topic and asked if Lin Fan had a girlfriend. Lin Fan calmly replied that he did not. Taking the opportunity, Nanai said that she was also single and asked whether he had ever considered dating. Lin Fan rejected the idea immediately. The answer shocked Nanai. She could hardly believe she had just been rejected. She quickly asked for the reason, and Lin Fan explained simply that he was still too young, only 20 years old. After saying that, he hurried off, explaining that he needed to continue clearing zombies and expanding the safe zone around the Huang faction's territory. Watching him leave, Nanai realized that his refusal was not meant to reject her personally. Instead, he was focused on the larger situation during the apocalypse and had little room to think about personal relationships. Meanwhile, Sukio continued observing Lin Fan from above every day. She constantly wondered who he really was and how he could move through groups of zombies without being harmed. Lin Fan occasionally looked up as well, noticing that the girl was still watching him. He wondered whether she had recovered mentally after everything she had experienced. Deciding not to worry too much about it, Lin Fan returned to clearing zombies around the nearby shops. When Sukio saw him draw his sword, she panicked, thinking he was about to lose control and attack her. However, Lin Fan suddenly sheathed the sword again. As if remembering something, he looked up and smiled in a simple, friendly way. He was reminding her of his earlier promise to greet her with a smile each day so she would feel less afraid. Unfortunately, Sukio misunderstood the gesture completely. In her eyes, his smile and gaze seemed threatening, making her even more convinced that he had dangerous intentions. Elsewhere, Guang Hai continued searching desperately for medicine for the pregnant woman in his group. As he moved through empty shelves, he realized that survival in reality was far harsher than the simplified situations often shown in zombie films. Suddenly, he heard a disturbing groan nearby. His body immediately froze. Guang Hai became completely silent and observed the surroundings, quickly identifying the sound as a zombie. Even with his military training, he understood that confronting a zombie unarmed would be extremely dangerous. He decided to retreat immediately rather than risk a direct fight. As the zombie slowly emerged from inside the building, Guang Hai ran at full speed. He knew that zombies usually reacted slowly before fully detecting prey, so escaping early gave him the best chance. The zombie behind him remained confused and had not yet realized what had happened. At the same time, in another area, Lin Fan was collecting supplies and casually eliminating several zombies that approached him. He muttered that they kept forcing him to defend himself. While doing so, Lin Fan suddenly noticed something strange. His sword felt sharper than usual and seemed to give off a faint glow. He wondered whether he was imagining it. Just then, a series of growls echoed from outside. Curious, Lin Fan looked out and saw Guang Hai standing on top of a bus, surrounded by a swarm of mutated creatures. Guang Hai silently cursed his luck. He had barely escaped from the pharmacy, only to become trapped by zombies again. For a moment, he believed that this might be his final day. Unexpectedly, Lin Fan called out and casually asked whether he needed help. Guang Hai immediately noticed something unusual about Lin Fan. The man carried a calm confidence and presence that reminded him of a seasoned soldier, something that could not be developed in a short time. The more he watched, the more certain Guang Hai became that Lin Fan was far stronger than an ordinary person and might actually be capable of saving him. Guang Hai considered asking Lin Fan for help, but quickly abandoned the idea. Instead, he shouted for Lin Fan to leave immediately so that he could find his own escape route. Lin Fan did not move. He simply stood there smiling and calmly asked whether help was needed. His voice immediately attracted the attention of the surrounding zombies, and they all turned toward him. Guang Hai's face turned pale. He cursed inwardly, believing Lin Fan had ignored his warning. In his view, if Lin Fan had run away earlier, both of them might have escaped while the zombies were distracted. Meanwhile, Lin Fan continued speaking to the zombies as if they were people. He criticized their violent behavior and explained that the sword he carried was only meant for self-defense. Suddenly, a small zombie lunged forward and attacked. Guang Hai froze, convinced that both of them were about to die. In the next instant, Lin Fan swung his sword and cut the zombie down with a single strike. Immediately afterward, he kicked the body so hard that it flew across the street and slammed into a wall. Guang Hai stood there in disbelief, unable to close his mouth. Even elite military fighters could not deliver such a kick. The strength clearly exceeded normal human limits. The remaining zombies began moving closer, their eyes filled with hostility. Lin Fan's tone turned colder as he remarked that when words failed, he would rely on the sword in his hand to resolve the situation. Guang Hai once again found himself speechless. Moments later, Lin Fan moved through the group of zombies with swift attacks, cutting them down one after another. When it was over, he calmly sheathed his sword and complained about how the fight had dirtied the street and would eventually require someone to clean it up. Standing on top of the bus, Guang Hai could hardly believe what he had witnessed. He wondered whether Lin Fan was even human. The scene reminded him of rumors he had heard earlier, stories about a lone swordsman walking through zombie-filled streets, gaining strange titles among survivors, and becoming something like a legend. Lin Fan then jumped lightly onto the bus roof and stood directly in front of Guang Hai. Although he had not understood the earlier shouts, he still smiled politely, raised his hand in greeting, introduced himself, and asked for the other man's name. Guang Hai remained stunned. The ease with which Lin Fan had reached the bus roof made him question whether the young man was truly human. At the same time, Lin Fan wondered why Guang Hai was staring silently, and even suspected that he might have hearing problems. When Guang Hai finally introduced himself, Lin Fan visibly relaxed and said he was relieved to know the man was not deaf. He then introduced himself properly and explained where he lived. Curious, Guang Hai asked how Lin Fan was able to deal with zombies so easily. He wanted to understand how the young man could defeat them so effortlessly. Lin Fan simply raised his sword and claimed casually that the weapon was special, calling it a powerful divine blade. Guang Hai chose not to question the explanation further. Instead, he introduced himself more formally and explained that he was still an active soldier who had returned home briefly when the apocalypse began. While speaking, Guang Hai noticed Lin Fan's unusual way of talking. It felt strange, but seemed more like a personal habit rather than something dangerous. Before Guang Hai could think further, Lin Fan suddenly invited him to move to Sunshine Residential Area. The suggestion surprised Guang Hai. It meant there were still many survivors living there. After considering the situation, he concluded that Lin Fan had likely helped rescue many people and did not appear hostile. He agreed to relocate. Guang Hai then asked if he could return briefly to bring the other survivors with him. Lin Fan calmly approved the request. Not long afterward, Guang Hai returned with a pregnant woman and another survivor, telling Lin Fan they had arrived. Lin Fan asked about their relationship. Guang Hai explained that Yang Hai was simply someone they had encountered during the apocalypse and decided to protect. Lin Fan then asked about her husband. Yang Hai answered briefly in a cold tone, surprising everyone present. Seeing the tension, Lin Fan quietly pulled Guang Hai aside and asked him what had happened. Guang Hai then began explaining the events that occurred earlier when he went out searching for medicine. After Guang Hai left their shelter that day, Yang Hai encountered a group of survivors who initially appeared organized and friendly. Believing that cooperating with them would increase their chances of survival, she had trusted them. Guang Hai explained that after Yang Hui met the group of survivors, they initially appeared friendly and organized. However, when they realized she was pregnant, their attitude changed immediately. They refused to let her stay and told the others to leave with them. What shocked Guang Hai the most was that Yang Hui's husband chose to leave with that group. He showed no concern for his pregnant wife and abandoned her completely. When Guang Hai returned, he found Yang Hui alone. He looked at Lin Fan anxiously and asked whether Lin Fan considered pregnant women to be a burden. Lin Fan simply smiled and replied that anyone who came there was a guest. Those words relieved Guang Hai. Despite everything she had experienced, Yang Hui had at least found a place where she would not be abandoned. Suddenly, Yang Hui bent forward in pain, clutching her stomach. Her expression showed that the labor had begun. Guang Hai immediately realized what was happening. At that moment, Liang Yin rushed outside and urged everyone to bring Yang Hui inside immediately. Before Guang Hai could finish speaking, she had already taken charge and instructed them to move her into the house. Lin Fan reassured everyone that Madame Su had been a military medic for many years and had the experience needed to handle the situation. After some time passed, everyone waited anxiously outside the room. Madame Su eventually stepped out and reported that the cervix had already dilated and the birth was about to begin. However, the conditions were extremely risky. She ordered all the men to leave the room and asked Lime and Yin Nanai to assist her. They had no choice but to attempt the delivery under these difficult circumstances. Hearing this, Lin Fan immediately became alert and picked up his sword. He understood that childbirth in the middle of the apocalypse was extremely dangerous and that any disturbance could put both the mother and child at risk. When Mr. Wong saw him preparing to leave, he asked where he was going. Lin Fan smiled and explained that childbirth required loud shouting for strength. Those sounds might attract zombies, so he would guard the entrance of Sunshine residential area to ensure safety and allow the delivery to proceed peacefully. Guang Hai objected, worried about the danger outside. Lin Fan insisted that they needed to create enough time and space for the child to be born safely. He explained that in the apocalypse, hope was created by people themselves. Sometimes hope began with the smallest lives. The child about to be born represented the future that everyone must protect and pass on to the next generation. Lin Fan added that as the protector of Sunshine residential area, it was his responsibility to do this. Since he was already being paid for his work, he believed he should fulfill that duty properly. Nearby, a little girl curiously asked Mr. Wong about a general he had mentioned earlier. She simply wanted to understand the story. Mr. Wong smiled and began telling her about a battle from the past. In that battle, General Dong had ordered his troops to hold the defensive line at all costs in order to buy time for a female soldier to safely give birth. The battle had been costly, and many soldiers died. Some people later questioned why such a sacrifice had been made for a single child. General Dong responded angrily to those doubts. He said that every sacrifice was made for the next generation. Protecting the future was the true purpose of their struggle. Only those who shared responsibility for the nation's survival could truly understand such decisions. Meanwhile, outside the district gate, Lin Fan sat quietly reading a novel titled Stark and his 365 Girlfriends. While reading, he commented to himself that the main character seemed to have a very colorful life. At that moment, a vehicle drove past him. After moving a short distance, it suddenly reversed and stopped near him. One of the people inside rolled down the window and looked at Lin Fan with suspicion. It seemed strange that there were no zombies nearby and that someone was calmly sitting in the street reading a book during the apocalypse. The man pulled out a gun and pointed it directly at Lin Fan's face, asking what he was doing. Lin Fan calmly replied that he was reading. The people in the car burst into laughter at his answer and began mocking him. Someone suggested that they should seize the house Lin Fan was sitting in front of. However, the group's leader decided it was better not to get out of the car because zombies nearby might notice them, and Lin Fan appeared unpredictable. Several people in the back seats praised the leader's caution. Lin Fan then calmly warned them that a pregnant woman inside the building was about to give birth. The noise might attract zombies soon. A purple-haired girl inside the car laughed loudly, holding her stomach as she called Lin Fan a crazy person. Lin Fan repeated her words, crazy person, and asked her to show some basic respect, clearly irritated by the remark. Seeing Lin Fan's serious expression, the purple-haired girl mocked him again and claimed she was not afraid of anything. She even threatened that they could deal with him however they wanted. The leader in the driver's seat pushed the gun closer to Lin Fan's face and asked if he knew what it was. Lin Fan calmly answered that it was a gun. The leader then began boasting about the lawlessness of the apocalypse. He declared that in the current world he could do anything he wanted and hinted that he could kill Lin Fan without consequences. He continued threatening that he could shoot him and scatter his head like a watermelon. Lin Fan replied calmly that, according to the law, illegal possession of a firearm carried a prison sentence. Considering the seriousness of the situation, he suggested the man should reflect on his actions. His answer left everyone in the car stunned. The blonde man could not even respond and assumed Lin Fan must be completely insane. The others in the back seats repeated what Lin Fan had said and then laughed loudly, insisting that in the apocalypse such laws meant nothing. Lin Fan quietly closed his book and said that they were the real lunatics. In his view, people who abandoned order and used cruelty to spread despair were the true problem. Those words angered the leader. He shouted at Lin Fan, demanding that he kneel and apologize if he wanted to live. Before anyone realized what had happened, the gun in the leader's hand suddenly disappeared. Lin Fan had already taken it with a quick movement. Frightened, the driver slammed on the accelerator and the car sped away. The passengers in the back panicked, asking why he was driving so fast. The driver, still furious at being humiliated, cursed while focusing on escaping. Meanwhile, inside the building, the pregnant woman's painful cries grew louder as labor progressed. Just as Lin Fan predicted, the noise soon attracted zombies to the area. From the upper floors, everyone watched anxiously, wondering whether Lin Fan could hold them back alone. Old Zone Go, however, remained confident and reassured the others that Lin Fan would manage the situation. The children also voiced their support, trusting Lin Fan completely. Zongo patted their heads and praised them, joking that once everything's settled he would ask Uncle Lin Fan to bring them more study books. Down on the street, Lin Fan continued cutting down the approaching zombies. By evening, the woman's cries still echoed from the building while the women inside worked together to help deliver the baby. Lin Fan looked around the street and quietly thought that the situation was about to intensify. Suddenly, he noticed movement on a nearby tall building. Zombies began falling from above in large numbers. Their bodies hit the ground heavily, but many of them soon stood up again. Drawn by the sound of human voices, the creatures staggered toward the area Lin Fan was guarding. Lin Fan remarked that these zombies were surprisingly durable, even after falling from such heights. Above, the residents watched nervously as more zombies gathered below. Even Zongo began to show concern, though he tried to remain calm. He spoke openly about how, in the middle of the apocalypse, he had finally seen a chance to rebuild society. In his view, the future depended on people like Lin Fan. One of the younger men suggested that they should go down and help him. Zongo stopped him immediately, explaining that rushing down would only create more burdens for Lin Fan, forcing him to protect even more people. The young man realized the old man was right. Going down now would only make the situation worse. At that moment, Wang Kai pointed toward a figure standing on a nearby rooftop. Something unusual was happening there. The zombie standing on the nearby rooftop looked different from the others. Its behavior was unusual, and it did not rush forward like normal zombies. This was a screaming-type zombie, a variant no one there had seen before. Suddenly, it demonstrated its ability. The creature let out a powerful roar and pushed forward with force. The sound was so intense that it nearly deafened everyone nearby. Even the people inside the building felt the effect. Nanai quickly rushed out and told everyone to wet cotton and block their ears to reduce the sound's impact. A girl inside called out, asking where she was going. As the noise gradually faded, several men in the corridor checked on one another to see if they were all right. Outside, Lin Fan endured the painful roar while worrying whether Hu Yang could withstand the stress during labor. Realizing the danger, Lin Fan decided the screaming zombie had to be eliminated first. Just then, something strange caught his attention. The zombies he had previously cut down on the ground began moving again. One after another, they stood up and started running in the same direction, as if responding to the same signal. High above, a pink-haired girl looked down in terror. It was the first time she had seen such a massive horde. Survivors in nearby buildings also peeked out of windows, stunned by the horrifying scene below. From many streets and alleys across the city, zombies were converging toward the same place. Lin Fan quickly realized the reason. The screaming zombie was attracting the entire horde. While he was observing the situation, he suddenly heard a door open behind him. Turning quickly, he felt someone tug at his shirt. It was Nanai, who had somehow managed to come down. Surprised, Lin Fan asked why she had come. Nanai burst into tears and said she had come because she was worried about him. Lin Fan stared at her for a moment before gently patting her head. He explained that he had to hold his position there. If he retreated, their entire shelter would soon be overrun. He told her to return upstairs to Hu Yang's group because Madame Su still needed her help. He pushed her back through the door. Before leaving, Nanai asked whether he was afraid. Facing the approaching zombies, Lin Fan answered honestly that he was afraid, but he could not stop and he could not retreat. At that moment, a heavy thud shook the ground. A massive zombie stepped into the area. Its eyes were bloodshot and frightening. The creature rushed at Lin Fan immediately. Lin Fan swung his sword and split the zombie apart with a single strike. Even so, the sensation felt slightly different than before. He began suspecting that his sword was growing stronger with each battle, perhaps absorbing something from the zombies. Before he could think further, the screaming zombie unleashed another deafening roar. The sound excited the surrounding zombies, making them move more aggressively as if they were being controlled. Wave after wave of zombies rushed toward Lin Fan. Even with his strength, the continuous fighting began wearing him down. Eventually, the pressure forced him back against the gate. Watching from above, Wang Kai began trembling as he saw Lin Fan surrounded. Inside the building, the father held the two girls tightly. He felt helpless. Children who should have been studying and growing up in a peaceful world were instead witnessing such a terrifying scene. Nearby, Chen stood frozen while watching Lin Fan struggle below. The sight reminded him of scenes from disaster movies. His hands and feet shook uncontrollably. For a moment, he wondered whether it would have been easier to give up on life entirely. Old Zongo stepped beside him. He told the young man that hope still existed and that he should not give in to despair. As long as even one person continued to hold hope, hope itself would remain alive. Zongo then pointed toward the street below. Lin Fan was down there alone, still fighting to protect everyone else. Meanwhile, those watching from above could only fall into despair. He asked the young man to imagine what Lin Fan would think if he could hear such hopeless thoughts. Patting his shoulder, Zongo reminded him that a person only lives once. If someone fights for hope, even at the cost of their life, that struggle still holds meaning. Hearing those words, the young man slowly regained his courage. The father holding his two daughters watched Mr. Wong and silently realized that without Lin Fan, Wang Junguno would be the pillar holding everyone together. Mr. Wong himself understood that as the oldest person present, he could not show fear. He needed to keep everyone calm and confident. Below, Lin Fan continued fighting with all his strength. One zombie lunged at his feet, and he crushed its head into the ground with a stomp. Surrounded by attacks from every direction, he still focused on holding back the horde. While fighting, he even wondered how many people in the Huang facility had not yet turned into zombies. He swung his sword in a wide arc, cutting down several zombies at once. At that moment, someone shouted his name. It was Cohen, who had gathered courage after Mr. Wong's encouragement. He forced his way closer through the chaos to warn Lin Fan that the screaming zombie was attracting the entire horde. Lin Fan cut down another group of zombies and told him he already knew. He ordered the young man to return inside immediately. Cohen understood that he could not help further. He turned back toward the building, realizing that everything now depended on Lin Fan. Amid the battle, Lin Fan suddenly sensed something unusual. From far away, he could hear waves of movement. Ignoring the pain in his body, he cut through another cluster of zombies. The sound made him realize the source of the chaos had to be eliminated. He jumped upward and began moving across nearby buildings. Soon he spotted the screaming zombie. Running forward, he leapt down and stepped on a severed zombie arm for support before looking directly at the creature. With clear disgust, he blamed it for causing the disaster. He rushed forward with incredible speed and raised his sword to strike. The screaming zombie panicked and tried to flee, but Lin Fan pursued it without hesitation. As it attempted to escape, he threw his sword directly into its torso, splitting the creature apart. A system notification confirmed the kill and awarded 3 points for eliminating a screaming zombie. Just then, the door behind him opened. Wong Kai ran out excitedly and announced that the baby had been born, a boy. However, his expression quickly changed when he saw Lin Fan. Lin Fan was still standing in the street, but his condition looked unstable. Even though the zombies were gone, he continued swinging his sword randomly while muttering that he must not retreat and must not allow any zombies through. Cohen rushed forward and grabbed his arm, telling him that everything was over and that the zombies had already been cleared. Hearing this, Lin Fan smiled faintly and said that was good news. Then he collapsed from exhaustion. When he woke up later, the first thing he noticed was that his feet were soaking in warm water. Nanai was carefully cleaning him. Embarrassed, she quickly explained that she was only helping clean his wounds. Lin Fan simply nodded and asked her to step outside so he could change clothes. Flustered, Nanai walked out with a red face. But as she moved, she slipped and fell straight into the tub. Instead of escaping the awkward situation, she ended up sitting in the water beside Lin Fan. She immediately insisted that it was an accident. Outside the bathroom, Wong Kai peeked through the door to see what was happening. The people outside misunderstood the situation. Mr. Wong jokingly commented about youthful energy, while the father quickly covered the girls' ears to avoid exposing them to adult misunderstandings. After some time, Lin Fan visited Hu Yang's room to see the newborn. Everyone asked how he was feeling. Lin Fan replied that he was not tired at all. In fact, he felt stronger than before. According to the system, his strength had now reached 605, a level beyond ordinary human limits. Some people jokingly looked at Nanai with suspicion, teasing that she might know exactly how strong Lin Fan was. Embarrassed, she could not respond. Mr. Wong cleared his throat and told Lin Fan to focus on visiting the newborn. Lin Fan asked Hu Yang whether she had chosen a name for the baby. Since she had just given birth, she had not yet decided. Madame Su explained that naming a child was important because the name would stay with him for life. Lin Fan agreed. Hu Yang looked at the baby for a moment and said they had not decided on a full name yet. For now, she suggested calling him Juju. Cohen quietly noticed that she still seemed to care about the man who had abandoned her. Unsure how to respond, he remained silent. Although Hu Yang appeared calm, it was clear that she must have been deeply hurt inside. At that moment, a little girl ran toward Lin Fan and proudly told him that she and her sister had not been afraid at all the previous day. She even mentioned that old Mr. Wong had promised to buy them exam papers. Faye stood behind them with an uneasy expression. Hearing the words exam papers made her feel that something unpleasant was about to happen. Lin Fan gently patted the little girl's head and promised that he would definitely buy the exam papers for them. The girl turned happily toward Faye and said that Uncle Lin Fan had promised the exam papers and asked if she was happy. Faye thought to herself that she was not happy at all and that Ting Ting had already worked hard enough. Seeing Faye's expression, Ting Ting stopped and asked what was wrong. Faye could not cry openly, so she simply said that she wanted to sing a song. While holding back tears, she quietly hummed the words of a song about gratitude and kindness. Ting Ting did not understand what was happening. Old Zone Go watched the children with a smile and commented that they looked very happy. Lin Fan agreed, even though the girls were actually in tears. The next morning, Lin Fan woke up as usual. He washed his face, brushed his teeth, and went outside to exercise. He greeted Old Wong and Old Zone Go, who had also risen early. Old Wong complimented Lin Fan on being handsome. Lin Fan seemed pleased, but also a little embarrassed, realizing the old man was simply trying to brighten everyone's mood. Lin Fan then saw Cohen and greeted him. Cohen replied that he planned to build more fencing around the residential area to block intruders. Lin Fan supported the idea and entrusted the work to him before saying he had other matters to deal with. Cohen gradually understood why Lin Fan could remain optimistic even in the apocalypse. Despite the chaos outside, Lin Fan continued to follow rules, maintain order, and keep faith in the future. Meanwhile, Lin Fan had another concern. The many zombie corpses piled near the house had to be removed. If they were left there too long, the smell would make the place unlivable. Later, at the dumping site, Lin Fan handled the task alone. He was nearly finished, as this was the last cart of corpses he needed to dispose of. As he dragged the cart across the road, a vehicle suddenly approached. It carried the same 4 people he had encountered earlier. The pink-haired woman spotted Lin Fan first and pointed him out. The blonde leader immediately recognized him and decided to run him over with the car. He pressed the accelerator while shouting that Lin Fan should die. The people in the back laughed and encouraged him. Seeing the vehicle charging toward him without slowing down, Lin Fan quickly stepped aside and avoided the impact. The leader spun the steering wheel and turned the car around. With a screech of tires, the vehicle stopped in front of Lin Fan. The men inside glared at him, clearly intending to attack again. Lin Fan calmly drew the sword from his back. The leader shouted angrily that he would kill Lin Fan. As the car rushed forward again, Lin Fan did not dodge this time. He stood still and raised his sword. When the car reached him, he delivered a powerful downward slash. The blade split the vehicle in half. The people inside were horrified. The blonde leader was completely speechless, unable to comprehend Lin Fan's strength. The section of the car where he was sitting broke apart and collapsed. Looking at his sword, Lin Fan felt more certain that his earlier suspicions were correct. Both his own strength and the weapon seemed to be improving through battle. The leader crawled out of the wreckage, covered in scratches. Instead of retreating, he cursed Lin Fan and threatened him again. Lin Fan asked calmly why they were trying to harm him when they had no personal grudge. The leader responded irrationally that he could kill anyone he wanted and demanded to know who gave Lin Fan the right to destroy his car. 2 other men crawled out of the wreckage, confused about what had just happened. The leader angrily replied that he did not know either. Seeing their attitude, Lin Fan sighed. He pointed at them and said that if they broke the law, they had to accept the consequences. He ordered them to follow him to the police station. The leader tried to rush forward and punch Lin Fan. The pink-haired woman attempted to stop him, but he pushed her away and insulted her, telling her not to interfere. The blonde man clenched his fist and rushed toward Lin Fan. He was the type of person who bullied others without reason and believed he could do whatever he wanted. Lin Fan calmly blocked the incoming punch with one hand. The man immediately lost the ability to move forward. Lin Fan told him bluntly that he was too stubborn and far too weak to threaten anyone. With a simple motion, Lin Fan knocked him to the ground. His back hit the pavement hard. Soon afterward, Lin Fan had tied up all of them. Their faces were bruised, and he began leading them away. While dragging them along, Lin Fan continued his corpse-clearing work and calmly explained that he was taking them to the police station. The pink-haired woman asked nervously if he really meant the police station. The 2 men quickly softened their tone and pleaded with Lin Fan. They argued that the apocalypse had already destroyed the old order and begged him to let them follow him instead. Lin Fan rejected the request without hesitation. Seeing persuasion fail, the pink-haired woman decided to try another approach. She attempted to seduce him and claimed she had many useful skills. Lin Fan ignored the attempt and refused again. Meanwhile, in a nearby building, another pink-haired girl watched everything from behind curtain. She had seen Lin Fan walking outside before and now noticed him again. When Lin Fan looked up, his expression frightened her. She quickly closed the curtain and convinced herself that he must be a dangerous person. She could not understand how someone could move around outside without fear during the apocalypse. Below, Lin Fan sighed. He assumed she simply had not accepted the reality of the apocalypse yet and decided to leave her alone. Later, Lin Fan arrived at the police station with the capture group. He mentioned that he had brought someone there before and hoped these people would also receive proper discipline. The pink-haired woman asked nervously what he intended to do. Lin Fan simply walked away and said goodbye, telling them he hoped they would reform and start over. Panic immediately filled her voice as she realized the situation. Inside the dark police station, many glowing red eyes appeared. Zombie police officers slowly emerged, drawn by the scent of human flesh. The next morning, Brother Han woke early and went outside. He suddenly realized that Lin Fan had gone out the previous day and had not yet returned, which made him worry. Just as he finished speaking, the door opened. Lin Fan walked in cheerfully and greeted everyone. He explained that while clearing zombie corpses the previous day, a large amount of blood had remained on the road. He needed someone who could drive to wash it away because he himself did not know how to drive. Brother Han initially agreed, but then asked how Lin Fan had brought the vehicle back if he could not drive. Lin Fan demonstrated immediately. He lifted the front of the vehicle by himself and dragged it aside, leaving Brother Han completely speechless. From above, old Wang Junguno saw them and joked that if they were using a vehicle, they should pick one that played music. Madame Su scolded him lightly for acting childish. Soon afterward, Brother Han and Lin Fan drove out together to clean the streets. During the drive, Brother Han suddenly asked Lin Fan about his plans for the future. He remembered Mr. Wang saying that Lin Fan represented hope for the restoration of society. Even so, he still struggled to understand Lin Fan's mindset. Lin Fan thought for a moment and explained that he had once been an unnoticed interior designer. Now he had become a protector and someone who could take on many responsibilities. Brother Han then asked a deeper question. With Lin Fan's current strength, he could easily take whatever he wanted in the apocalypse. What kind of path did he plan to follow? Lin Fan immediately corrected him. He said that even as a soldier, Brother Han's thinking was flawed. If someone wanted something, they should earn it with their own effort rather than take it from others. The straightforward response left Brother Han slightly embarrassed. Lin Fan then explained that he wanted to continue striving on his own instead of using the apocalypse as an excuse to seize opportunities from others. Just then, Lin Fan noticed something unusual behind them. He asked Brother Han to stop the vehicle. A massive zombie appeared nearby. It was a brute strength type. Lin Fan stepped out of the vehicle and walked closer to examine it. Cohen remained on the vehicle and warned Lin Fan to be careful. Lin Fan drew his sword while thinking that evolved zombies were appearing more frequently. Suddenly, the large zombie jumped forward and attacked him. The scene shifted briefly to a desert research base. Someone shouted for others to stop the creature before it destroyed the facility. A massive evolved zombie was rampaging through the base, crushing equipment and vehicles. Even armored vehicles were unable to stop it. Scientists and researchers inside were urgently calling for help while a female commander and an elderly doctor tried to manage the situation. Back at Lin Fan's location, the evolved zombie roared in pain. Lin Fan had already driven his sword into its head. As he pushed the blade downward, he felt the creature's skull resisting his strength. The bone was extremely hard, but Lin Fan continued forcing the sword forward. The tip of the blade finally reached the brain. With a stronger push, the sword sank deeper and black blood sprayed out. The zombie collapsed heavily onto the ground, and the system rewarded Lin Fan with 3 points. The fall of the huge body made the ground tremble slightly. Only after the fight ended did Cohen dare to run closer and ask whether Lin Fan was all right. Standing calmly amid the dust, Lin Fan assured him that everything was fine and said he could protect him. Cohen was briefly stunned by Lin Fan's presence. When Lin Fan noticed his expression and asked what was wrong, Cohen simply replied that it was nothing. In truth, he felt conflicted. He had always claimed he would protect others, but rarely had anyone said they would protect him. Later, a group of survivors discovered the dead zombie lying on the road where Lin Fan had killed it. 2 men stepped out of their vehicle to inspect the body. The driver mentioned that it looked like the same zombie they had encountered before. However, the man in white disagreed, explaining that the previous one had a gunshot wound on its leg, while this one did not. The young man in a blue shirt wondered who could have killed such a creature. When the man in white examined the wound, he realized the zombie had been killed with a single blade strike rather than gunfire. That meant the killer had faced the monster alone, which suggested the person responsible was extremely powerful. Another passenger in the vehicle, a woman, sensed danger and urged the driver to leave immediately. Soon afterward, the group arrived at the Sunshine District residential area. The driver noticed that the place looked unusually clean, as though someone had been maintaining it. He also pointed out that the entrance door had been repaired, which indicated that people were living there. The woman remained cautious and warned that contacting strangers during the apocalypse could be dangerous. The young man in blue recalled a past encounter where someone they had helped nearly stabbed him. Meanwhile, at room 704 in the Sunshine District, someone knocked on the door. Lin Fan, holding a knife for safety, opened the door and saw Nanai standing there. Since she had moved into the community, Lin Fan noticed that she looked healthier and more cheerful than before. Her appearance surprised him slightly. Nanai entered the room, and Lin Fan mentioned casually that she was the second girl who had come inside his home. Hearing this, Nanai became annoyed and asked who the first woman was. Lin Fan answered awkwardly that it had been a neighbor who had attacked him earlier and that he had killed her with a knife. The statement startled Nanai, and her voice trembled. Lin Fan noticed her reaction and scratched his head, realizing the explanation might sound strange. Nanai nervously suggested that he put the knife down before continuing the conversation. Lin Fan agreed and placed the knife aside. She then explained why she had come. Blushing slightly, she said she needed him to buy some supplies because her relatives were about to arrive. In reality, she meant that her menstrual period was coming. Lin Fan misunderstood her meaning. Thinking that her relatives were truly coming to visit, he expressed surprise that people could still travel safely during the apocalypse. He even began considering buying extra food and preparing a proper meal for them. Lin Fan scratched his head in confusion. Seeing his reaction, Nanai waved her hand quickly and blushed, explaining that she did not mean visiting relatives. She clarified that because there were so many zombies outside, she wanted him to help buy sanitary pads. Once she said it directly, Lin Fan finally understood. He awkwardly scratched his head again, but agreed immediately. He promised to buy them the next day. Nanai then asked if he could also get some for the other women living in the building, and Lin Fan agreed. Later, the scene shifted to the Huang facility water plant. Lin Fan and Wang Kai finished inspecting the equipment and prepared to leave. To avoid attracting zombies, they traveled by bicycle. While crossing a large bridge on the way back, Wang Kai pointed toward the river and noticed a boat in the distance. Looking closer, they saw 2 men and 3 women on board. The 2 men were fishing while the 3 women were dancing to music. Wang Kai worried that the noise might attract zombies. Lin Fan hesitated about whether they should intervene. However, he reasoned that if the group stayed on the water and knew how to swim, they might actually be safer there than on land. After leaving the bridge, they stopped near a bookstore. Lin Fan told Wang Kai to wait outside while he went in. Thinking about the children in their community who were eager to study, Lin Fan bought 10 sets of practice exam books to take back. He imagined they would be so happy they might cry. Next, they visited a mother and baby store. Again, Lin Fan asked Wang Kai to wait outside. He thought about Hu Yang and her newborn child, and assumed she would need supplies even if she was too shy to ask for them. Afterward, they stopped at a supermarket. Lin Fan again told Wang Kai to wait outside while he gathered supplies. Wang Kai felt slightly embarrassed watching Lin Fan carry large amounts of goods while they only had small bicycles. Inside the supermarket, Lin Fan bought various necessities. He also remembered to pick up the sanitary pads Nanai had requested. Suddenly, a zombie appeared behind him. Its long tongue hung down toward its stomach as it lunged forward. Lin Fan immediately cut it in half with a single strike. Soon he heard more noises and realized other zombies were approaching from different directions. Staying alert, he followed the sound. While moving through the supermarket, he suddenly spotted a small boy. The child was terrified. Lin Fan quickly grabbed the boy and jumped down from a ledge to safety. Seeing the frightened expression on the boy's face, Lin Fan reassured him that he was human. At that moment, several zombies broke through the doors and rushed into the supermarket. Panic spread. The boy looked back at Lin Fan in confusion. Normally, everyone ran from zombies, but Lin Fan stood his ground. Lin Fan moved quickly, slashing through the incoming zombies. Within moments, several of them were cut down and scattered across the floor. The boy watched in shock as Lin Fan defeated the entire group. Once the area was clear, Lin Fan approached the boy and asked what he was doing there. He thought it was unusual for a child to survive alone during the apocalypse. The boy nervously explained that he had come to look for food. Lin Fan asked if he was alone. The boy lowered his head and politely confirmed that he was. He then thanked Lin Fan and said he was going home. As the boy began to leave, Lin Fan called him back. He felt it was strange that a child could reach the supermarket safely under such dangerous conditions. Seeing how pitiful the boy looked, Lin Fan suggested escorting him home. After some hesitation, the boy agreed. On the way, Lin Fan learned that the boy's name was Gu Qingtong. The name reminded Lin Fan of a man named Gu he had encountered earlier. Before the boy could ask further questions, Lin Fan explained that he worked as a security guard and also as a housing broker. He asked whether the boy lived with his grandfather, and the boy politely confirmed it. Soon they arrived at a small house. The boy called out loudly that he had returned home. Inside the house, Lin Fan discovered that the boy's grandfather was paralyzed in both legs and unable to walk. The boy happily told his grandfather that he had brought back bread and noodles. The old man was relieved to see his grandson return safely. When he noticed Lin Fan standing beside him, however, he became cautious. They had been bullied by neighbors before, and their food had been stolen more than once. Seeing the old man's wary expression, Lin Fan explained calmly that he was not a bad person. He had simply met the boy at the supermarket and wanted to bring him home safely. Gu Weiqing immediately told his grandfather that Lin Fan was very strong and had easily defeated several zombies. The old man felt embarrassed and quickly thanked Lin Fan for helping them. Lin Fan waved it off, saying it was nothing important. While looking around the room, Lin Fan noticed the wall covered with the boys' award certificates. He praised Gu Weiqing for being talented. The grandfather proudly explained that the boy was well-behaved and had always performed well in school. When Lin Fan asked about the boy's parents, the old man explained that Giching's father had died while trying to save someone from drowning. His mother later left with another man, leaving the grandfather to raise the child alone. Despite this difficult past, the boy had remained obedient and understanding. As the old man continued speaking, he became emotional and began to cry. For years they had survived on government assistance, but after the apocalypse began they had no food left. That was why the boy had risked going to the supermarket. Without Lin Fan's help, he might never have returned. The boy quickly held his grandfather's hand and told him not to cry, saying he was grown up now. Suddenly, the old man tried to stand up. Lin Fan quickly supported him. With tears in his eyes, the grandfather asked Lin Fan for a favor. He begged Lin Fan to take Gu Weiqing away with him. He said Lin Fan did not have to raise the boy forever, just give him enough food to survive. The old man insisted he would not go along because he did not want to become a burden. Hearing this, Gu Weiqing ran forward and pushed Lin Fan away. He refused to leave his grandfather and told Lin Fan to go. Lin Fan paused and reflected on their situation. In the past, he had rarely noticed people struggling like this. He had always seen the brighter side of life, but now he realized how difficult survival could be for the weak during the apocalypse. After thinking for a moment, Lin Fan made a decision. He told them that neither of them was a burden. He would take both the grandfather and grandson to a safe place. He believed people like them deserve help and hope for a better future. He gently ruffled the boy's hair and praised him for being brave and devoted to his grandfather despite the hardships he faced. Lin Fan then asked the old man whether Gu Weiqing was his only family member and whether he could truly bear losing him. He added that he understood the pain of losing the only person left in one's life. He had experienced that feeling before and did not want others to suffer the same fate. With a smile, Lin Fan told the boy to pack his things and bring his backpack. He said he would take them both somewhere safe. The grandfather and grandson thanked him repeatedly and happily prepared to leave. However, when they stepped outside, a man was already waiting there. The man warned them that it was dangerous to go out on the streets. Gu Weiqing immediately pointed at him and told Lin Fan that this was the man who had stolen their food before. The old man explained that the man's name was Wan Yi. After losing his job, he had begun surviving by stealing. One day he came asking for rice, and out of kindness Gu Weiqing opened the door. Wan Yi then robbed them of all their food and even assaulted them. Gu Weiqing lowered his head and blamed himself for not being strong enough to stop him. Lin Fan comforted him and said that he had already done well. He told the boy to leave the rest to him. Then Lin Fan turned toward Wan Yi and directly asked whether he felt any shame for stealing food from an old man and child. The man rolled up his sleeve and revealed a tattoo, declaring arrogantly that the food around him belonged to him. He claimed to be a gangster and warned Lin Fan not to interfere. Lin Fan showed no fear and stepped closer with a firm expression. The man instinctively stepped back and demanded to know what Lin Fan intended to do. Trying to assert control, the man pushed Lin Fan. However, Lin Fan did not move at all. Frustrated, the man grabbed a nearby chair and prepared to smash it over Lin Fan's head. Before he could swing, Lin Fan threw a punch that shattered the chair in his hand. The man froze in shock, realizing the strength of the person standing before him. Lin Fan then pointed at several sacks of rice nearby and asked Gui Qing if those belonged to them. The boy recognized them immediately and confirmed they had been stolen from their home. Lin Fan calmly picked up the sacks and handed them back to the grandfather and grandson. After returning the rice, he simply told them it was time to leave. Even after being spared, the man shouted angrily at them as they walked away. Gui Qing turned back and warned him not to act shamelessly, reminding him that Lin Fan had chosen not to harm him. Later, Lin Fan brought the grandfather and grandson back to the Sunshine District housing area. Old Wang Juno and Old Zongo came out to greet them, while Wang Kai helped push the grandfather's wheelchair. Zongo admired Lin Fan's actions. In a time when everyone was struggling to survive, bringing home both an elderly man and a child showed a rare sense of responsibility. Gui Qing introduced his grandfather, Guya Jiang, to the group. Lin Fan then explained how he had met them and why he decided to bring them there. Old Wang welcomed them warmly, saying that having more people around only brought more life to the community. After learning that Guya Jiang was 67 years old, they arranged how everyone would address each other. Lin Fan had already prepared a place for them to stay. Since the grandfather could not move easily, he arranged a room on the first floor. Soon afterward, Nanai and the other women arrived. When Lin Fan saw Nanai, he handed her a large bag filled with different kinds of sanitary pads. He explained that he had carefully selected both day and night types. He even added a blunt piece of advice about avoiding menstrual pain, suggesting that pregnancy would stop such troubles. His comment immediately made Nanai blush deeply. She misunderstood his words and ran away in embarrassment, leaving Lin Fan confused by her reaction. Next, Lin Fan handed supplies to Sister Li and thanked her for managing the kitchen. He also brought items for Hu Yang and the newborn baby. Madame Su joked that Lin Fan was very thoughtful and that any woman who married him would be lucky. Lin Fan replied modestly that, given his current situation, he doubted anyone would want him as a husband. Afterward, he remembered something else and pulled out exam workbooks for the two girls, Ting Ting and Fei Fei. Ting Ting accepted the books happily, clearly excited. Fei Fei reacted very differently. Although she held the workbook politely, she felt overwhelmed inside, but did not dare say anything. Lin Fan encouraged her to study hard and promised to buy more materials if she performed well. Fei Fei quietly swallowed her tears while thinking that one diligent student was already enough, yet Lin Fan had now brought another hard-working child into the household. Finally, Lin Fan asked Madame Su to help guide Gui Qing in his studies as well. When everyone learned that the boy had already won many academic awards, Fei Fei felt even more pressure. Meanwhile, the next morning began quietly. Just after waking up, Lin Fan heard a knock at the door. A voice from outside called out. It was Sister Li, still half asleep. Lin Fan opened the door and noticed she was already up. Curious, he asked what she needed so early. Sister Li explained that it was Fei Fei's birthday and wanted to ask him for a favor. Lin Fan immediately smiled, as if he had already figured out. Since Fei Fei was the most studious child he had ever met, he confidently declared that he would go buy several more sets of practice exam books and give them to her as a birthday present. Sister Li froze for a moment. Then, with an awkward laugh, she explained that she was not asking for study materials. She only wanted him to buy a cake, or at least ingredients, so she could bake a birthday cake herself. Lin Fan finally understood, but still asked seriously whether she was sure Fei did not need more practice exams. At the same time, the scene shifted elsewhere. Inside a cake shop, cake influencer Su Xiaoxiao had just woken up. Lying in bed, she quietly wished the apocalypse had only been a dream. But every morning, she woke up to the same reality. With nothing else to do, she decided to open the curtains and let in some sunlight. The moment she pulled them open, she found Lin Fan sitting outside her window. Lin Fan greeted her casually. Su Xiaoxiao was so startled she screamed and immediately grabbed a knife. Nervously, she demanded to know what he wanted. Lin Fan lowered his voice and calmly explained that there was a 10-year-old child at his place whose birthday was today. He wanted to order a custom cake and wondered whether she could make one. At the same time, Lin Fan quietly thought to himself that he should speak gently so he would not frighten her. From what he had observed before, she seemed emotionally unstable, and he assumed the apocalypse had affected her mental state. Su Xiaoxiao stared at him in complete confusion. A child? A birthday? A custom cake? She could not understand what he was talking about or why he was speaking so softly. She started overthinking the situation. If she told him there was no cake, maybe he would insist on coming inside to check. That thought made her even more nervous. After hesitating, she simply said that there was cake. Lin Fan smiled and immediately asked how much it would cost. That question confused her even more. Money had become meaningless during the apocalypse. She could not understand whether this was some kind of trick or strange game. Unable to make sense of him anymore, she gave up and impatiently told him to pay whatever he wanted. Hearing that, Lin Fan nodded naturally. Then he jumped down from a window and told her he would come back in the afternoon to collect it. Su Xiaoxiao watched him leave in disbelief. He had really come only to order a birthday cake, and then he simply left. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the Chao River in Huang City. Carrying a fishing rod and a basket, Lin Fan arrived at the riverbank. As he walked, he thought that after so many days, all the meat in the market must have spoiled. But today was Fei's birthday, and no matter what, he wanted her to have something fresh to eat. He hoped the fishing gear he had spent more than 200 yuan on would finally prove useful. While fishing quietly by the shore, a yacht approached carrying 3 people. One of them, a gray-haired man, noticed Lin Fan and pointed toward him in surprise. It was actually a survivor. Lin Fan casually waved. The man asked what he was doing out there. Lin Fan answered simply that he was fishing and asked where they were heading. One of the younger companions looked at him in disbelief. With zombies everywhere, fishing outside felt no different from waiting to die. The gray-haired man explained that Huang City had already become impossible to live in. Their plan was to travel downstream, reach the open sea, and settle on nearby islands where there should be no zombies. He invited Lin Fan to come with them. Privately, the man thought it was not kindness alone. Surviving outside required manpower, especially capable men. Since there were already 3 of them together, even if Lin Fan had bad intentions, they could handle him. Lin Fan smiled and declined. He thought to himself that even during the apocalypse, people still willing to help others could not be bad people. Just then, 3 zombies silently approached from behind him. The people on the yacht panicked immediately. They shouted that zombies were far stronger and faster than ordinary people and urged Lin Fan to jump into the river so they could pull him aboard. Otherwise, he would definitely die. Lin Fan turned around calmly, drew his sword, and simply replied that it was fine. One companion argued that zombies moved beyond normal human limits and no one could outrun them on land. Another sighed and said they could not risk their own lives to save him. To them, it looked like Huang City was about to gain another zombie. But in the next moment, Lin Fan swung once. All 3 zombies were cut down instantly. The people on the yacht froze. They stared in complete disbelief. Lin Fan calmly put his sword away and said he had already told them there was nothing to worry about. Then he asked if they truly planned to live on the islands. The gray-haired man nodded and explained that staying in the city meant dwindling supplies and growing zombie numbers. Pear Island seemed like their best chance. Lin Fan sincerely wished them safe travel. Before leaving, the gray-haired man advised him to abandon Huang City as soon as possible. He said that if Lin Fan had the ability, heading deep into the mountains might offer a better chance at survival. The yacht slowly departed. The gray-haired man waved goodbye, while warning that hope in the city would only continue fading. Then, from behind Lin Fan came countless growls. A huge swarm of zombies was approaching. Looking back, Lin Fan frowned. There were simply too many. Watching from the yacht, the gray-haired man sighed. Just as expected, That number was beyond what one person should be able to handle. It was already too late to turn back. What a pity. If that young man had joined them, he would have been an incredible companion. After some time, the scene shifted back. Lin Fan had already cleared the entire zombie swarm with little effort. He calmly sheathed his sword and said to himself that the work was finished and it was time to head back. Far away on the departing yacht, the gray-haired man witnessed everything. He stared in disbelief. He had never seen anyone eliminate that many zombies so easily. For a moment, he even began to reconsider his plans. Instead of heading for the island, following someone like Lin Fan might actually be safer. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Sunshine Community, room 204. Yang Hui was lying on the bed beside her child. Quietly, she asked Sisterly whether her baby could truly grow up healthy. Nothing had happened yet, but she could not stop feeling uncertain about the future. Sisterly smiled and reassured her. She told Yang Hui not to think that way and reminded her of Mang Mang, the child whose mother tied her to herself before sacrificing her own life so the child could survive. She said that no matter how difficult things became, they had to keep living and remain hopeful. Everyone in Sunshine Community would help raise the child together. Sisterly admitted she had once fallen into despair too and had even thought of giving up. But when she looked at Fei Fei, she realized she had to continue living and protect her child. Then she met Lin Fan. Through him, she found hope again, saw a future worth believing in, and remembered that humanity still had value even during the apocalypse. Because of that, she learned to treasure Sunshine Community and appreciate everything they had built together. Holding Yang Hui's hand, Sisterly promised that if danger ever came, she would protect the community with her life. Because this place was no longer just shelter. It had become where her hope began. Yang Hui quietly thanked her and said she understood. At that moment, there was a knock. Lin Fan opened the door and entered. He said he had caught a grass carp and brought it over so Yang Hui could have nutritious fish soup. He also reminded Sisterly to save some for Fei Fei since it was her birthday. Then he suddenly remembered the birthday cake. Sisterly told him to leave everything in the kitchen and said she would cook the fish later. But Lin Fan volunteered to do it himself. After he left, Sisterly turned back to Yang Hui and told her to see how much everyone cared about her. She encouraged her to become stronger so one day she could also contribute to the community. Yang Hui's eyes filled with tears. She thought quietly that she had only arrived recently, and yet everyone treated her with kindness. Even in the apocalypse, humanity still existed. Back in the kitchen, Lin Fan placed the fish on the cutting board and held a knife. Then he suddenly realized he had never actually cooked fish before. Should he remove the scales first, or cut it open and remove the organs? While he was thinking, Sisterly quietly walked over. Standing behind him, she reached out and gently guided his hands. She told him she would teach him. Startled, Lin Fan froze. Sisterly smiled awkwardly and admitted that she was only a housewife and could not do much during the apocalypse. Cooking was the only thing she felt she could contribute. If she could teach someone else, then maybe she could be a little more useful. She asked him not to underestimate that. Following her instructions, Lin Fan carefully cut the fish. Feeling awkward, he hurriedly told her that he would never think that way. He sincerely praised her cooking and said everyone liked the food she made. Meanwhile, Lin Fan quietly thought to himself, Sisterly seemed unusually enthusiastic about improving herself today. Suddenly, Lin Fan stepped away and awkwardly cleared his throat. He told Sisterly that he still had to accompany Wang Kai to inspect the water plant equipment and asked her to handle the fish for now. Without waiting for a reply, he quickly left the kitchen. Watching him leave, Sisterly smiled to herself and quietly thought that brother Lin Fan really was an interesting young man. Meanwhile, on the rooftop of the residential building, Gu Heng and Chun Li stood together observing the area. Gu Heng asked whether there was any way to improve the community's defenses, especially preventing zombies from piling up and rushing into the residential area. Chun Li immediately felt pressured. Inwardly, he wondered why people kept expecting answers from him. Gu Heng was a trained soldier, while he was only a broadband installer. After thinking for a moment, Chun Li admitted that solving something like that would be difficult. Gu Heng replied that old Chief Wang had said Chun Li was highly educated and skilled with networks, so perhaps he could come up with an idea. Chun Li silently complained to himself that if he were truly that educated, he probably would not have ended up installing broadband. At the same time, Lin Fan and Wang Kai rode bicycles toward the water treatment plant. As they traveled, Lin Fan seemed distracted and unusually quiet. Wang Kai called his name several times before finally getting his attention. Lin Fan snapped back and asked what was wrong. Wang Kai curiously asked what he had been thinking about. Lin Fan quickly denied it and said it was nothing. Soon afterward, they arrived at Huang City Water Plant. Lin Fan parked the bicycle and suggested they inspect the equipment first. But Wang Kai suddenly frowned. He remembered clearly that they had closed the main gate yesterday. Yet now, the gate stood slightly open. Wang Kai quietly pointed it out. There was no way the wind had opened it. Lin Fan immediately became alert. He confirmed that the gate had definitely been closed. Wang Kai realized what that meant. Someone else had entered the water plant. Lin Fan remained calm and said that regardless of what happened, they needed to inspect the inside and make sure the equipment was still functioning. As he approached the entrance, he quietly told Wang Kai to stay behind him just in case. Wang Kai nodded nervously. The door slowly opened. Inside, hundreds of zombies filled the entire area. The moment the door moved, countless heads turned at once. Lin Fan's expression changed. The sound had alerted them. Immediately, the horde surged forward. Faced with the charging zombies, Lin Fan drew his sword. At the same time, confusion crossed his mind. He had personally cleared every zombie from this place before. So how had this many appeared again? Someone must have deliberately brought them here. For the first time, Lin Fan felt that he had underestimated how dangerous people could become during the apocalypse. After some time, Lin Fan finished clearing all the zombies inside the water plant. He put away his sword and let out a quiet breath, relieved that the area was secure again. Wang Kai came out shortly after and reported that he had checked the equipment. Everything was functioning normally. Hearing that, Lin Fan fell into thought. Since nothing inside had been damaged, it seemed unlikely that whoever brought the zombies here intended to destroy the purification system. Their actual goal was probably to lure them away or set a trap. Then something suddenly occurred to him. Without explaining further, he immediately told Wang Kai to pack up because they needed to return at once. Meanwhile, back at Sunshine Community, after finishing her studies in Grandma Liang's room, Fei Fei stepped outside and called after Ting Ting and Brother Ziue, confused to see them rushing off ahead of her. She found it strange. Competing and studying was already enough, yet now they even seemed eager to get home first. Before leaving, she said goodbye to Grandma Yang. Grandma Yang smiled and casually said she would see her again shortly. As Fei Fei walked downstairs, she quietly wondered what that meant. She guessed Grandma Yang probably wanted to talk with her mother about school and stopped thinking about it. When she reached home, she knocked and entered while complaining that studying had been tiring. But the moment she looked up, she stopped. The room was full. Everyone had gathered together. Confused, she asked her mother what was happening and even wondered if it was her mother's birthday. Instead, her mother gently told her that today was actually her own 10th birthday. After Uncle Lin learned about it, he had gone out specifically to buy a cake so everyone could celebrate together. Fei Fei stood frozen. Her school bag slipped from her hand. She had not expected anyone to remember. Her eyes slowly filled with tears as she thanked everyone one by one, Uncle Lin, the adults, the grandparents, and everyone who prepared the surprise. Lin Fan smiled and called her over. Just then, Grandma Yang walked in and hugged her from behind while wishing her a happy birthday. Only then did Fei Fei understand. Ting Ting and Brother Bing had hurried back earlier because they already knew and wanted to wait for her. Holding back tears, she quietly said that being able to celebrate a birthday in the apocalypse felt like an unimaginable luxury. Soon everyone gathered around and sang together. The room became warm and lively. Sisterly glanced outside and quietly asked whether making so much noise might attract trouble. Lin Fan simply smiled and reassured everyone. As long as he was there was nothing to worry about. Meanwhile, outside the building, the noise from the birthday celebration gradually spread beyond Sunshine Community. One after another, zombies picked up the sound and began gathering at the entrance. Soon, they crowded the gate and started pushing against it while letting out rough growls. Seeing the movement below, Lin Fan picked up his sword and calmly told everyone that he was heading downstairs to deal with something. Wang Kai laughed and casually remarked that Brother Fan was probably going down to cut through the zombies and make Fei Fei's birthday even more lively. Before he could continue, Miss Yin struck him lightly in the stomach with her elbow and told him not to describe things so graphically because he was scaring Fei Fei. Wang Kai immediately apologized. At that same moment, a vehicle from Huang City approached the entrance of Sunshine Community. One of the men noticed Lin Fan standing ahead and asked whether the figure was a person or a zombie. The brown-haired companion judged that it looked human, but warned everyone to stay alert in case it was bait for a trap. The man in the cap suddenly stiffened. After staring for a moment, he realized he recognized Lin Fan. It was the strange guy from the library. Curious, Mr. Lee asked what he meant. The man quickly explained that while searching for medical books earlier, they had encountered this same person. Back then, while everyone was freely taking books, Lin Fan insisted books should still be registered properly because it was a library. He had even casually claimed he could handle 80 to 100 zombies alone. The group had treated him as someone completely unreasonable. Another companion added that he still remembered nearly getting stabbed by a kid during an earlier incident and only escaping because someone reacted fast enough. That memory still gave him chills. Meanwhile, Lin Fan had already finished clearing all the zombies outside Sunshine Community. He sheathed his sword and looked around. The area was clean again. Only the bodies remained to be dealt with later. Deciding not to think about cleanup for now, he turned back toward the building. Fei-Fei's birthday came first. Inside the vehicle, the brown-haired man stared blankly. He couldn't believe Lin Fan was still alive. The cap-wearing man quietly muttered that there was no way someone like that could be normal. But their short-haired leader remained calm. She pointed out that nobody could survive this long in the apocalypse by being reckless. Even their group struggled to survive together. Someone unstable would never make it this far. She ordered everyone not to approach and told them to leave at the next turn. She could not understand Lin Fan, and that uncertainty alone made her cautious. At the same time, she quietly reflected on everything they had experienced and realized that before the apocalypse, she had never imagined human nature could become this complicated. Back inside Sunshine Community, after returning, Lin Fan walked toward Fei-Fei's room carrying a gift box. He entered and handed it over, explaining that it was a present prepared for her by everyone. Fei-Fei's eyes lit up immediately, but almost instantly, her expression became complicated. Then she remembered the gift came through Uncle Lin Fan. Her excitement faded slightly. She quietly wondered if it was another stack of exam papers. Lin Fan simply smiled and suggested opening it first. Beside her, Tingting became excited and urged her to hurry because she wanted to know what was inside too. Fei-Fei hesitated awkwardly. Then, with complete seriousness, she suggested that maybe Tingting should just take the gift instead. Tingting blinked in confusion. She had no idea where that suggestion came from. Fei-Fei slowly opened the gift box with visible hesitation. Thinking back on all the previous gifts Uncle Lin had given her, she honestly did not dare expect anything. But the moment the lid opened, she froze. Inside were toys. Her eyes widened in surprise. For a brief second, she could hardly believe it. So this time, it was actually a normal gift. Relief instantly replaced her tension. She looked up happily and sincerely thanked Uncle Lin and everyone else for preparing it for her. At that moment, her thoughts became unexpectedly simple. As long as it wasn't exam papers, she would like any gift. Seeing her reaction, Lin Fan smiled and gently rubbed her head. Then he casually explained that the toy needed batteries and could play recorded sounds and poems. He even enthusiastically described how nice it would be to lie in bed and listen to them while resting. The moment she heard that, Fei-Fei's expression slowly stiffened again. So this really was still related to studying. Inside, she quietly cried for help. Meanwhile, Lin Fan misunderstood her reaction completely. Looking at her teary eyes, he smiled proudly and praised her for loving learning so much that she was emotional again. Sister Lee stood nearby watching and could not help commenting that even as Fei-Fei's mother, she found that difficult to believe. If Fei-Fei truly loved studying that much, her grades should not always be struggling. Fei-Fei quietly lowered her head and continued suffering in silence. Then Tingting excitedly joined in and happily suggested that from now on they recite poems together because she really liked poetry. Hearing that, Fei-Fei felt as if another tiny devil had appeared beside her. Her birthday suddenly became a lot more complicated. Meanwhile, second floor of a repair shop. The Huang City group had been staying there. Mr. Lee quietly reflected that since the apocalypse began, survival itself had become the dividing line between people. Those who adapted survived. Those who did not mostly disappeared. He believed the old standards for judging people no longer applied. People now thought first about staying alive, and actions once considered impossible had become normal. Before the apocalypse, he had simply worked as a mechanic and enjoyed cars. He never imagined people could become so cruel. But after experiencing enough hardship, his understanding of people had completely changed. Sometimes he felt that if he had kept his old way of thinking, he would not have survived. Looking toward their leader, he thought quietly. Although he was the oldest member, he was only responsible for driving. Most decisions came from Big Sis. She was younger than everyone expected, but calm and capable enough that he willingly acknowledged her leadership. Looking at the remaining teammates, he felt reassured. Their four-person group had survived by relying on one another. After reviewing their observations from recent days, Big Sis summarized several conclusions. There were places they absolutely could not approach. Xingfeng Hotel was one of them. A survivor group had already occupied it, and the corpses outside showed conflict had happened there. Whoever controlled that place was not simple. Their own survival depended heavily on old Jin's cleaning truck. Without that vehicle, their situation would become much worse. Another forbidden place was Shanshui Garden. The man they encountered, there was someone she recognized, a subordinate of Crazy Wolf Wang Dafu, the leader of the Huang City gangs. Although he had invited them over before, she believed the invitation was never sincere. Their vehicle was the real target. Following that group would only lead to trouble. Mr. Lin nodded in agreement. As people from Huang City, they had all heard of Crazy Wolf Wang Dafu. His reputation was simple, ruthless, dangerous, and not someone ordinary survivors wanted to cross. One of the brown-haired teammates added that their leader's appearance only made things worse. In the apocalypse, both resources and women had become scarce, and someone like Wang Dafu would not let opportunities pass easily. The leader gave a dry cough and continued summarizing the dangerous areas they had identified. Another place to avoid was Hengji Apartment. Unlike other locations, it was only a single aging apartment block with many residents originally living on the lower floors. When they passed through the area, the sight had shocked all of them. The streets below were covered with broken bodies. From the condition of the scene, they guessed that during the early outbreak, many residents had chosen to jump after being cornered by zombies. But privately, she suspected something else. There might have been more than panic involved. She kept that thought to herself. That night, a vehicle suddenly stopped near their shelter. Moments later, their windows shattered violently. Startled, the leader rushed over and looked outside. Her expression changed immediately. They had arrived. Crazy Wolf Wang Dafu's subordinates. The man in the cap grew angry and questioned whether they were intentionally trying to kill them. Mr. Lee quickly realized the reason. They were after the truck. Outside, a red-haired man sitting in the vehicle turned on a loudspeaker. Soon an exaggerated scrap collection advertisement echoed through the street, repeatedly announcing collection of old televisions, washing machines, monitors, water heaters, and more. The group immediately understood. This was deliberate. The engine noise alone had already attracted nearby zombies. Adding the speaker would pull in even more. Growls soon filled the area. Zombies began flooding toward the shelter. Then the leader's expression worsened. Mixed into the horde was the same giant strength-type zombie they had encountered before. She realized the situation had become serious. The cap-wearing man cursed under his breath. Even in the apocalypse, people still found ways to harm each other. The brown-haired teammate observed that their vehicle had clearly been targeted and that staying there any longer would only make things worse. The leader quickly made a decision. Everyone was told to move carefully, avoid making noise, gather only what they needed, and prepare to leave. They had already been marked. That shelter was no longer safe. Meanwhile, Sunshine Community. The next morning, after waking up, Lin Fan stepped onto the balcony, stretched lightly, and greeted the day in a relaxed mood. From below, Grandma Liang called out and mentioned that they had opened another section of the vegetable garden. She asked whether he could bring back more seeds later. Lin Fan agreed immediately. Soon after, Lin Fan headed toward the market. On the way, he stopped beside an electric motorcycle and looked at it for a moment. He had always wanted one, but now the city no longer had electricity. Switching to a normal motorcycle was not practical either since engine noise attracted zombies. He was not worried for himself, but he often needed to bring Wang Kai to inspect the water plant, and unnecessary attention would only create problems. Just then, something caught his attention. Looking toward a nearby apartment window, he noticed a small boy holding up a banner. Written across it were simple but urgent words, "Help me. There's still a group of teenage girls here." Looking toward the apartment window, Lin Fan became slightly confused. What caught his attention was not the request for help itself, but the strange emphasis on there being a group of teenage girls inside. For a moment, He wondered whether the kid thought he could attract people that way. The thought annoyed him slightly. Still, he pushed it aside. Whatever the reason, it was better to see the situation personally before making assumptions. So he headed toward Hengji apartment, 7th floor. After entering the building, Lin Fan immediately noticed something unusual. The corridor was filled with zombie corpses. Looking at the scene, he quietly wondered whether a group of children could realistically deal with this many zombies. The situation did not add up. As he approached the room and knocked on the door, he became more cautious. Whenever something felt strange, there was usually a reason. Soon the door opened. A small boy appeared with red eyes and an uneasy expression. Looking frightened, he hurriedly invited Lin Fan inside. Lin Fan entered calmly and reassured him that although the apocalypse was dangerous, there were still good people trying to help others survive. At the same time, he quietly observed. The child's reaction felt exaggerated. But since the boy wanted to act, Lin Fan decided to play along for the moment. Behind his back, the boy was secretly gripping a knife. Inside, he felt excited. The trap had worked. Without warning, he suddenly thrust the knife forward and stabbed toward Lin Fan's stomach. His expression changed immediately after. He expected blood. He imagined Lin Fan collapsing in disbelief, holding his wound and slowly losing strength. Just imagining it excited him. But instead, Lin Fan looked down at his clothes and asked in confusion why the boy had stabbed his shirt. The boy froze. He clearly felt the blade connect. So why was there no blood? Thinking he simply lacked force, he started stabbing repeatedly while shouting for Lin Fan to die. But Lin Fan remained completely still. After a moment, he only sighed and commented that the clothes were a shame. Inside, Lin Fan was calm. With his current physical condition, something like a small dagger should not be capable of injuring him. The boy stepped back in disbelief. This completely exceeded his understanding. Then Lin Fan looked at him for a moment and casually asked, "You're not actually a child, are you?" The question instantly changed the boy's expression. He stared blankly and asked when Lin Fan had figured it out. Lin Fan smiled slightly. "So that means you admit it." From the moment he saw the message downstairs, something already felt wrong. What bothered him most was how the boy repeatedly emphasized that there were teenage girls inside. He couldn't understand why that detail mattered. Then after hearing him speak up close, Lin Fan became certain. The appearance matched a child, but the voice clearly belonged to an adult. Before the dwarf could respond, 3 people carrying weapons stepped out from behind him. One of the short-haired men looked annoyed and asked why he still hadn't finished the job. The dwarf hurriedly explained that something was wrong. He had stabbed Lin Fan again and again, but only managed to tear the clothes. Another man snorted and admitted they had always relied on Sun Xiang's childlike appearance to lure survivors inside. It had never failed before. The scar-faced man cut them off and dismissed Lin Fan's resistance as nothing more than hidden protection under his clothes. With their numbers and weapons, he believed they could beat him to death anyway. Lin Fan remained calm. He advised them to think carefully before continuing. He warned them not to cross a line they could not undo later. Whether they held weapons or not made little difference to him. Once he entered self-defense mode, things could become difficult to control. The group looked at him blankly. One muttered that he had no idea what Lin Fan was even talking about. Another noticed that Lin Fan still had both hands in his pockets and thought his attitude was absurdly arrogant. Without waiting longer, they rushed forward together. One shouted that they should kill him quickly and complained about being hungry enough to want fresh meat. The next moment, Lin Fan moved. No sword, no wasted motion. He stepped forward and delivered 3 clean strikes before any of them could react. The attackers collapsed instantly. Looking at them, Lin Fan calmly asked where they found the confidence to talk about eating people. They were not even worth drawing his sword for. The dwarf stared blankly. His knife slipped from his hand. His companions had gone down in a single exchange. He could not understand what he had just witnessed. Slowly, Lin Fan crouched beside him. He reminded him that he had already warned them not to act impulsively. Once self-defense started, things tended to become unpleasant. Then Lin Fan mentioned that earlier the dwarf had stabbed his clothes many times. Returning the favor once seemed fair. The dwarf's thoughts turned blank. What kind of person had they provoked? But before he could react, Lin Fan struck once. A heavy punch landed in his stomach. Blood spilled from the dwarf's mouth. At that moment, Lin Fan suddenly paused. There was a strong smell of blood, but it wasn't coming from the people in front of him. His gaze slowly shifted toward a closed room nearby. He walked over and opened the door. Inside, there were severed remains and scattered bodies. The scene made everything clear. These people had survived by feeding on other survivors. Lin Fan quietly closed the door. His expression stayed calm, but his conclusion was simple. This had crossed beyond human behavior. Behind him, the dwarf struggled on the ground and desperately begged to be spared. Lin Fan stood up and drew his sword. Then he calmly changed his earlier decision. Since the dwarf had tried so many times to stab him, returning the same number sounded fair. He added that the sword was large, so if he endured for a moment, it would end quickly. The dwarf's scream echoed through the apartment. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Huang City, Shanshui Grand Residence. The red-haired man returned after the failed operation and reported everything to Wang Dafu. The plan to lure zombies toward the Huang City gang's shelter had failed. He explained that he stayed in the car the entire night. Once the noise stopped, the zombies gradually lost interest and dispersed. Later, he saw the heavily reinforced vehicle leave the area and followed it for some distance. But the other side quickly noticed him. Instead of escaping, they deliberately stopped and let zombies surround them. Their vehicle was strong enough to withstand ordinary zombie attacks, but his own car was just a normal sedan. Once trapped, it would be destroyed and everyone inside would be dragged out. He had no choice but to abandon the pursuit and shake off the zombies. Wang Dafu sat smoking and drinking while listening. He cursed their luck. No matter what, he wanted that vehicle. With equipment like that, survival and expansion would become much easier. The red-haired man then mentioned something else. Among the horde, he had seen a completely new type of zombie. Its body was enormous, almost like a moving hill. It smashed vehicles apart casually and could throw multi-ton vehicles with brute force. Wang Dafu narrowed his eyes and asked if he was certain. The man immediately confirmed it. One of the older members spoke up and warned that if such creatures truly existed, their current defenses might not be enough. Another member agreed and suggested accelerating construction around Shanshui Grand Residence. Now that they controlled the area, they should strengthen it properly and turn it into a permanent base before expanding outward. A violet-haired member laughed and talked excitedly about becoming rulers in the apocalypse, enjoying the best food, alcohol, and even meeting celebrities. Someone beside him joked that if anyone got such privileges, Wang Dafu would be first. Wang Dafu remained silent for a moment. Inwardly, he reflected that chaos creates opportunities. Everyone wants to become king. But to dominate the apocalypse, strength alone is not enough. People in a secure base matter more. Back in peaceful times, he lived in the shadows and only appeared powerful to ordinary people. Compared to real authority, he had been insignificant. But now the world had changed. Finally, Wang Dafu stood and addressed everyone. What they needed most now were weapons. But before acquiring guns, they had to finish building an absolutely secure base. If everyone followed him, he promised they would not lose. The apocalypse was dangerous, but together they could seize anything. His people immediately erupted into cheers and pledged loyalty. The scene shifted again near Sunshine Residential Area. A distant explosion echoed through the city. Inside the room, Lin Fan turned toward the sound. Judging from the direction, he guessed it came from the industrial district where many factories were located. The sudden blast frightened Meng Meng and Jiujio, making both children cry. Looking at them, Lin Fan quietly realized the problem. Crying could attract nearby zombies. To avoid trouble, he decided to clear the surrounding area first. Outside the main gate, groups of zombies had already begun gathering. Growls echoed continuously as they pressed closer. As Lin Fan headed toward the entrance, Old Wang, who was standing near the security area, noticed him and casually asked whether he was heading out again to clear zombies. Lin Fan nodded. There were not many zombies gathered outside yet, but he was worried that noise would attract more over time. Old Wang stopped him and casually added another request. Since Lin Fan was already going out, could he help buy some supplies on the way back? There was quite a list, and the destination was a little far, so he offered 200 yuan as a service fee. Lin Fan accepted immediately. Old Wang then suggested taking his car and going together with Gu Hang since their routes overlapped. Lin Fan agreed, while continuing to clear the zombies near the entrance. Soon after, the scene shifted. Lin Fan and Gu Hang were driving toward the market. Along the way, Lin Fan glanced at him and casually remarked that life had not been treating him very gently lately. Gu Hang sighed. Disaster had fallen on everyone equally. Everything happened too suddenly, and even now nobody truly understood the cause. He mentioned that zombie movies often blame viruses, but he doubted that explanation. Viruses require hosts and nutrients. Yet these zombies continued moving endlessly. Biting survivors alone could not explain their existence. He recalled the screaming zombie from the day Yang Hui gave birth. That creature could attract other zombies and behaved more like evolution than infection. To him, it felt impossible to explain everything with disease alone. Lin Fan listened quietly. Then he simply said that everything would end someday. Until then, he would keep eliminating zombies. One day, when no zombies remained, rebuilding could begin. Gu Hang smiled helplessly. Lin Fan's thinking was straightforward. Huang City alone once held over 10 million people. Survivors were now the minority. If they continued killing zombies one by one, how long would that take? Lin Fan thought for a moment. Nothing in the world is impossible if someone truly persists. Even mountains could eventually be moved. Perseverance would win in the end. Meanwhile, they arrived at Xinfeng Market. The entire area was packed with wandering zombies. Growls echoed through the streets. After getting out of the car, Lin Fan calmly told Gu Hang to press the horn several times. Gu Hang looked confused. Lin Fan explained while drawing his sword. Zombies like hiding in corners, alleys, and blind spots. Shopping while leaving hidden threats around was too dangerous. It would be safer to lure them out first. Gu Hang immediately understood. He started honking continuously and left the cleanup to Lin Fan. The sound spread through the market. One after another, the zombies rushed toward the entrance. Looking at the growing crowd, Lin Fan told Gu Hang to drive around outside for a while. There were too many. If the car stayed parked, it might get smashed. Gu Hang acknowledged and drove off. After that, Lin Fan stepped forward alone. His sword moved continuously. One slash after another cut through the incoming horde. Meanwhile, from the second floor of a nearby shop, a black-haired observer watched silently. Seeing Lin Fan clear the zombies so effortlessly left him stunned. He could not understand whether this was still within human limits. Only a short time later, Gu Hang returned. But the battle was already over. The streets had gone quiet. All the zombies were gone. Gu Hang looked around in disbelief. Finished already? If this had been the age of peace, Lin Fan would have become a legend in the military. A ridiculous internet joke suddenly resurfaced in his mind. As long as the enemy doesn't deploy nuclear weapons. Their side promises not to deploy Lin Fan.